Music's loud. All right, hello everyone on this nice toasty summer evening. This work session of the Osseo School Board is being conducted in person and in compliance with Minnesota Statute 13D.01. Up to 10 members of the public can be seated in the boardroom, and up to an additional 15 persons can attend on site in the nearby cafeteria. The work session can be monitored electronically by streaming online from the district website. An archived recording of this work session will also be available on the district website. The purpose of the school board work session is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. The outcome of this this evening's work session will be the board members will receive updates and information on the 2021-2022 budget and equity context analysis process results and recommendations for the student school board program. To acknowledge attendance this evening, I'll ask board members please state their names, starting with Director Tamara Grady.
Here.
Director Thomas Brooks.
Here.
Director Jackie Mosqueda Jones.
Here.
Director Tanya Simons will be joining us shortly. Director Heather Douglas.
Here.
And I, Kelsey Dawson-Waltham, am present. Superintendent Corey McIntyre and General Counsel Tim Palmatier are present in the boardroom as well. The superintendent's cabinet and other district administrators are seated in another conference room. Individuals will come into the boardroom as needed. I will now ask Superintendent McIntyre to facilitate the agenda items for this evening's work session.
All right.
Superintendent McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair Dawson-Walton, and good evening, board members. Thank you for coming in on this hot day again. Tonight we have a very full agenda, and we're really excited to bring these three topics to you as they're really essential in moving us forward in our continuous improvement efforts. Our first agenda item tonight, you'll get an update from our team around the 21-22 proposed budget, which you'll take action on at the June 22nd board meeting. As part of that presentation, you'll also get some updated information regarding some considerations on budget projections and impact beyond the 21-22 school year. Our second item later tonight, you'll receive a high-level summary of our equity context analysis results from the process that has been happening for really most of the school year, and will be a basis for us as we finalize our district strategic plan. And then lastly, we'll be giving you a presentation on some options along with a recommendation for a student school board representative program starting in the fall of the 21-22 school year. So to get us started tonight on our first agenda item, I'll welcome Ron Meyer, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations, to the podium to facilitate our presentation of the FY22 budget. So thank you, Ron.
Okay, good evening, Chair Dawson-Walton, Superintendent McIntyre, school board members, and cabinet members. We come before you this evening to give board members a first look at the final proposed budget for fiscal year 2022. Tonight's work session, as well as the board meeting coming up on June 22nd, is a culmination of our long-range financial planning process that has been implemented over the past year. The board will have spent parts of 9 work sessions and board meetings receiving information, giving direction, and taking action on the fiscal year 2022 budget, including our request coming up on June 22nd to approve the final comprehensive budget. So this evening, we will go through the important elements of the fiscal year 22 budget, and we will review the Basin Tactics forecast tool for the General Operations Transportation Fund, the Food and Nutrition Service Fund, the Community Service Fund, and the capital budget. Before I turn it over to our team to take you through those items, I want to provide some context to what you will be reviewing this evening. As board members know, school districts rely heavily on funding from the state of Minnesota for our budget. And while the state economic forecast has improved dramatically over the past 6 months, and even though the governor and leaders in both the House and Senate have agreed on the framework of an overall budget for K-12 education, an approved state budget has still not been passed. Because of this, our budget tonight, and to be approved on the 22nd of June, includes the revenue assumptions that we previously discussed with the board. Specifically, a 0% increase in the general education formula. This is also reflected for both years of this biennium in our financial projection model that we'll go over later on this evening. Once a final state budget is approved, we will determine the financial impact to the school district for this year, as well as for future years of our projection model, and bring it to the board in November, where we ask the board to set parameters for our fiscal year 23 budget. Another item I would like to address before turning it over to our finance team is our Basin Tactics financial projection model. We are entering into the 8th year of our referendum authority. As you may recall, while we have recently maintained a healthy fund balance, we are projected to start deficit spending in our current fiscal year, our 21 fiscal year. Each year that we add to the model, and this evening you will see that we have added fiscal year 26 to that last year of our projection, we will continue to increase our deficit spending. As you will see from the model that Kelly Benusa will introduce in just a few moments, our future deficit spending will require some significant operational reductions if we do not consider other interventions now. So some potential solutions for us to consider include maintaining our 3% target increase for future budgets, which we, if you recall, decreased from 3.25 last year and for several years preceding that as part of our tactics. This is the target percent increase that we use as we develop our budgets, assumptions, and also our negotiations framework. If we continue at this decreased target level, we could minimize the amount of operational reductions that would be needed in future years. Included in the projections models that you will review tonight are that 3% expenditure tactic for budget increases for fiscal year 23 all the way through fiscal year 26 of the model that you'll see. Another solution that the board could consider is an increase in revenue. As we have discussed in our Building a Better Future conversation, we will need to look at renewing our operating referendum in the fall of 2022, at the very latest, the fall of 2023. Currently, we are below the cap, or the maximum amount the state will allow us to levy for our operating referendum. And just for some context, if we were to increase our levy to the cap, we could generate approximately $7.5 million per year in additional revenue for the school district. A third consideration is to utilize a portion of the federal funds that were allocated to our district as part of the American Rescue Plan to maintain our current level of services. It's important to note that while these funds can be used to maintain services, because they are not a permanent funding source, the utilization of these funds will not alone solve our financial challenges. Again, Kelly Benusa will walk the board through a financial projection model tonight that includes the use of a portion of these funds, just so that you can start to see and start to think about the potential impact. I do want to be clear that the use of federal funds is not necessarily a recommendation or a proposal at this point in time, but rather an idea for the board to start to consider. If it is determined to warrant further consideration, a proposal could be brought through our comprehensive ESSER 3 budgeting process that we are currently developing, which would include a stakeholder feedback component. And then the final consideration is some combination of decrease in expenditures, operational reductions, and new revenue from the operating referendum and or from the one-time federal revenue. So with that, I will turn it over to Kelly Benusa, our Director of Business Services, and she will walk you through a summary of the general operating and transportation budget, and will also walk us through those financial forecast models for the general fund and the capital fund. Also with us this evening that you will hear from is Jeff Ansorge, our Director of Nutrition Services, and he will go through the Food and Nutrition Service financial forecast, and also Brian Severson Hall, our Executive Director of Community Engagement, who will take us through the community education financial forecast. So with that, I will turn it over to Kelly Benusa.
Good evening. Before I start, I'd like to extend my sincere appreciation to Mike Hewler and Michelle Larson. Both of them are coordinators in business services, as well as Liz Lanto, who's our accountant in business services, and our budget managers across the district for their assistance in the compilation of the budget materials tonight. This year has been challenging from a financial standpoint, and the fiscal year 22 budget adoption is no exception to our work this year. So if we start with the memo, in your packets tonight, the timeline for the budget process is embedded within the memo for fiscal year 22 budget planning. And for the fiscal year 22 budget planning process, there were multiple opportunities for the board to provide direction or take action. Included in the budget are adjustments related to COVID-19 that will not be carrying forward into fiscal year 22, that will be reviewed during this presentation, and the other funds budgets that have been built for this evening have also used that same methodology. So we've provided comparisons for the fiscal year 22 budget in two ways. The first comparison is of the proposed adopted budget for fiscal year 2022 versus the revised budget for fiscal year 21. The table shows a planned spend down of fund balance of almost $16 million in fiscal year 22. Included in the proposed fiscal year 22 budget is the February 23rd board approved budget adjustments for a net increase of $416,422, which include the long-range financial planning budget adjustments of a negative $2.4 million and strategic priorities for an additional $2.8 million. With these adjustments, the percentage increase in the expenditure budget is 2.82%, which is below the expenditure trend target of 3%. Projected year-end fund balance is $63.8 million for fiscal year 2022. The second comparison is of the proposed adopted budget for fiscal year 2022 versus the projected fiscal year 2022 Basin tactic from February 23rd. The proposed budget is coming in almost $1.7 million better than previously projected, which is a slight improvement. So next, the revenues are lower by $2 million. And so to review those details, we have the largest negative decrease in revenues is in declining enrollment aid for fiscal year 2021. That goes away for fiscal year 2022. We have the unemployment levy and tax shift for almost $1.3 million reduction. And then we have special education revenue, which is an increase for fiscal year 2022, which is impacted by the revised estimates for fiscal year 20 and 21 on those current calculations, so an increase of $1.25 million. And then we have abatement revenue, tax increment, and local optional revenue, which are all items that are decreasing for this adopted budget. And then we have some items that are impacted by COVID-19. So co-curricular revenue, we're anticipating an increase again in that area of $320,000. We have a TRA pension adjustment revenue increase, which is offset by expenditure increases for TRA due to the rate increase of almost $254,000. And then we have an operating referendum revenue decrease for $253,000, which is based on students. And then we have delinquent taxes and Medicare third-party billing revenue, which are areas of decrease or increase this year for 2022 due to COVID-19. And then we also have non-public transportation and desegregation transportation increases. And then we have a slight change in our gen ed. Again, as Ron had mentioned, we have a 0% built into this budget. So just a slight adjustment of $109,000. And then if we move into the expenditures, we can see that expenditures are lower by almost $3.6 million than we had anticipated. So again, when we think about expenditures, we think about them in four big broad categories: salaries, benefits, purchase services, and then other. And so if we start with the salaries, those are decreasing due to projected settlements, adjustments in FTEs, as well as just realigning those amounts here with our 22 adoption. And it also includes those long-range financial planning and strategic priority adjustments that were approved by the board. We have our attrition and allocation of staff of a decrease of $1.6 million. We're adding back some salaries because of COVID-19 for $843,000 increase. And then we're eliminating a position for a principal on special assignment, and then we're offsetting that by an increase in purchase service capacity. So then if we move into the benefits, we see a decrease of $484,000 in the areas of medical insurance and HSA. We're seeing our preferred one rates increase about 2.6%, and then our PEEP is estimated to increase about 5%. And then we have that employee plan migration, so that's almost $1.4 million of the increase. And then we have other items that are coming in below that 3% target that we were previously mentioning, so a decrease of $1.3 million. And then we have unemployment, which is going to be a decrease we anticipate for next year of $752,000. And then there's the offset of the revenue that we shared just previously for the TRA rate increase for next year of $254,000. We anticipate our workers' compensation coming in at least 13% better than it was in '21, so a decrease of about $110,000. Then moving into purchase services, we have our transportation contract, and built into that contract is a 5% increase, so that's almost a $1.6 million increase. We're adding back purchase services for items that were impacted by COVID-19, so almost $1.1 million. And then when we look at our utilities, we're anticipating electric refuse going up, as well as water and sewer, so an increase of $690,000. When we look at all the items that we're holding at zero, that's $650,000, less than that 3%. And in the next line is the offset then for the one position that's being eliminated, so bringing that capacity back into purchase services for $162,000, as well as a small increase in tuition. When we look at other services, that area is decreasing about $660,000, so there's a federal indirect rate charge that we can charge our operations into the federal grants, and that's going from 1.1% to 3.7% next year. So that'll save the general fund about $380,000. And then our other services, again, are remaining at 0%, so a savings of $303,000. And we have a fuel increase anticipated of about $186,000, as well as, again, some of those COVID impacts that won't be happening again next year. At least they're not built into the budget. So a savings of $167,000. So the next steps for the budget process, June 22nd, we'll bring the budgets back to the board for their approval for all the funds you're going to hear about tonight. And then in July, we begin preparation for our 21 audit. And then in November, our plan is to bring the audit in its final state for the board to approve. So now I'm going to switch and go over the Basin tactics for the General Operating Transportation Fund. So first I want to set up the document because it's going to be the same setup for all the funds. So we have 9 years of data on these documents. We have 4 years of prior, the current year, and then 4 years worth of projections. So the base in this fund is the top section, and that's in blue, and then the tactics is the bottom section in gray. So the arrows on the document highlight in the bottom left corner the fund balance target as a % of expenditures. In the bottom right corner is the revenue and expenditure assumptions for future years. And then the bottom of the projected 2022 column shows the projected fund balance for the upcoming budget cycle. So again, this is a similar format for all the funds that will be presented this evening. And included in the documents for this evening are 3 Basin tactics for the General Operating Transportation Fund. So included is the February 23rd version for comparison purposes, and then the June 22nd version, which will utilize federal funds as a tactic, and then an alternative June 22nd version, which adds additional revenue estimates for the fiscal year 22 and 23 legislative biennium, which still remains unsettled as of today. So moving to the second Basin tactic, that's blue in your packets. This is the one that utilizes federal funds as a tactic. So again, in the bottom left corner, there's an arrow and it's pointing to the 5% fund balance. That target remains the same. In the bottom right corner, there's an arrow and it's pointing to the 0% revenue and the 3.5% expenditure projection assumptions for fiscal years 23 through 26 based on trend data. And then moving up to the blue section, the adopted fiscal year 22 column has been updated with the revenue and expenditure budgets, and it includes no change in the basic formula allowance, and the long-range financial planning and strategic priorities are included in the budgets. We've also added fiscal year 2026 to the projection model, and so in the base portion of this model, we have a combined $47 million in operational reductions that would be needed, starting with a $7 million operational reduction in fiscal year 23. So now moving to the gray section, That's where we have our revenue tactics. So one of our revenue assumptions is including a 0% formula increase for 22 and 23, followed by a 1% increase in 24 and 26, which are the first years of the next 2 bienniums. So this is a conservative approach to the revenue projections. So next is the operating referendum timeline, and it shows the 10-year operating referendum ending in fiscal year 24. The model assumes that the operating referendum will be renewed for fiscal years 25 and 26, and we'll need to begin those conversations, as Ron had stated earlier, regarding renewing the referendum, and we are currently $7.5 million under the cap, and then we have a note on the bottom of that page that provides that additional information. And then moving on to the expenditure tactics, the enrollment alignment adjustment includes the most recent 5-year enrollment projections, which include the fiscal year 23 projection of recapturing of an additional 25% of those students which were lost in 21. So this line shows adjustments that will be needed over the next 4 years. The next tactic is to continue reducing our expenditure trend growth to 3%. And then the next tactic is recommending sustaining programs and services with federal funds for fiscal years 23 and 24. And then adding back those items for fiscal year 25. This tactic would utilize a total of about $14 million from the ESSER 3 90% allocation. This tactic is providing an option or an idea that the board could consider as we look at the funding provided from ESSER 3. And then by utilizing both the revenue and expenditure tactics, we eliminate the need for operational reductions in fiscal year 23. And then we reduce future reductions from the base model for a combined $36 million. So now if we move to the last Basin tactic, so the difference between this version and the previous one is that it has an additional revenue of 1.5% added to the basic formula for fiscal years 22 and 23, which is this current legislative biennium that's yet to be settled. So those numbers are highlighted in yellow under the revenue tactics, and this tactic reduces the future operational reductions by $5 million. However, the operational reductions combined for fiscal years 24 through 26 are still projected at $31 million. So in summary, for the General Operating Transportation Fund, we have a short-term improvement in the financial projection with some long-term challenges ahead for us. And with that, now's an opportunity for the board to ask questions, and then after each fund, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So,
Thank you. All right, Director Grady.
I don't have a question at the moment. Thank you.
Director Brooks.
No questions.
Director Mosqueda Jones.
My one question is just because of my eyesight. So 22 and 23 on the last Basin tactics that you
Yes.
showed us was 1.5%, and then it was 24 and 25. Was that 1 3/4?
it's a 1% in 24 and 26.
Okay, I thought I said 1 3/4. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes.
Director Simon.
I have some questions about some of the benchmarks in our packet, but would that be later in the
Later.
presentation? Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
No questions on the details. Thanks
Okay.
for the work that went into that and all of the change and monitoring and adjusting. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Director Douglas.
I don't have any questions on this portion.
And Superintendent.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I do want to thank the team as well. Really, the big takeaways here I want you to be wrestling with, like we are, is not knowing what the state's going to do. And we've heard about 2 and 2. We're not going to assume we're going to get that. I worry the longer we go into the summer, the harder that's going to be. So we went with 1.5 and 1.5 in that last scenario. And the reality is, considering more of part of the ESSERS 3, the $23 million we're getting in ESSERS 3, to use up to $14 million of that to prevent reductions in the next 2 years. Prevent or minimize, we can't eliminate maybe them all, at least we can in FY23, I think Kelly, you said, as we get into FY24, clearly minimizes that. And then another tool or variable that we have to think about is when we go to that operating referendum, whether we just renew as is or there's that room to the cap that could also bring in another $7 million. So those are the big levers on this. We don't know what the state's going to do quite yet, and you're going to have to pass a budget before we know. And then as you look out those additional years, we've kind of built this on that 1 and 0, 1 and 0. We always wrestle with, we know that's a bit conservative, but we really can't assume a lot from the legislature necessarily. And, 7 of the last 10 years, they went into overtime and special session. So, spending down $16 million in this next year, I think, is that right, Ron and Kelly? That's what we're looking at, is that fund balance will come down. So we have a couple tools that are available to us. One is that the federal money, along with how we look at the, waiting on the state funding to come through. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see that before you have to make a decision in a couple weeks. So that's why we gave you 3 scenarios there. As you play with those different variables, it seems more and more realistic to me to think about using those part of that federal money to minimize really large reductions in our functioning. And then we also need to pay attention to, I don't know, Kelly, if you're going to get there later, but our ESSER's 2 commitments we made for a 2-year window for that burst of service are on some critical things. Those dollars go away after 2 years as well. So when you really look long term, we have some short-term things we can do to mitigate some large reductions, and then see what the state does as we move into into this biennium and then future bienniums, which gets even harder to predict, right? So thank you for trying to map out a lot of moving parts to this budget, and things I just wanted the board to be thinking about as we move into your decision-making for the 22nd of June.
Can you restate again the federal funds, the timing of them? I know the ESSER, one was just for the 2 years, the last round, and then this round is for how long?
Put me on the spot there
Here's
with
your
all those grants.
challenge,
So ESSER 1, those are the dollars we're spending this year,
Yep.
and then they carry over into next year. And then
Okay.
we've got ESSER 2, which we can spend in this year and next year. And I'm not sure about the following year. And I think the following year. And then we've got our ESSER $3, which we can start spending next year. And then they follow for the next year after that, and then they go away in '25.
In 25?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, all 3 ESSERs go away in '25?
I think it's actually
It's tiered.
September of '24.
Okay.
Yeah. Does
Yes.
that sound right, Ron?
Yeah.
September of '24.
Yeah, I think based on our planning, because there's just such a
Yep.
short window, then in
Yeah.
that next fiscal year, so.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
one-time money that
Yeah.
can help us in the short term, but not real, can't assume, those dollars aren't there for a long-term planning purpose.
So now we'll transition into food and nutrition with Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, good evening. Nice to see everyone. I'm Jeff Ansorge. I'm the Director of Food and Nutrition Services. So I'm going to go over today's Basin tactic. I believe it's on page 11. Does everyone have that in front of them? Okay, so generally speaking, well, first of all, food service, we're a fund too, so we're a self-supporting fund. We don't rely on the general fund. We basically make our revenue based on the sales of our food, and then we're reimbursed through the federal government and the state government, primarily the federal government, and a small portion through the state. And so generally speaking, when we go through our Basin tactic and when we plan for our upcoming years, we go off of previous years. And looking at the roller coaster that we've been on in our current year and the year previous, we don't really have a good base year to go off of. So looking at 2022, our base year that we've been using was the actual of 2018-19, so the 2019. And what we did is we looked at the enrollment from 2019 to the enrollment that we are projecting for 2022, and we're about 450 students less roughly. Then we look at the Distance Learning Academy, which will be the 279 online come this fall, and we're projecting about 1,200 kids there, and we're projecting, based on what we learned this past year, that 20% of them will take meals, and we can offer those meals. So basically, we're projecting 2020 on 1,450 less students, multiplied by our breakfast participation and our lunch participation to get our target numbers for the year. And when you look at another big piece of this is the reimbursement rate. So previously, we were under the National School Lunch Program, which has a lower reimbursement rate than summer. And the USDA and the MDE have, in the past year and a half really, allowed us to operate in a summer program, which allows us to serve more students in different manners, right? So the student doesn't have to be there to pick up the meal. A parent or an adult can come get it for them. And another thing it allows for districts is a higher reimbursement rate. We're looking at approximately 70 cents more for a lunch and another 30 cents increase over the National School Breakfast Program. So our reimbursements are a bit more as well. So that's how we came up with our 22 budget. And if you look at 2018-19, and if you were to see 17 here, you'd see revenues pretty much hovering around the $13 million mark, and our expenditures hovering around the $12 million mark, roughly, and plus the capital. So ultimately, 2022, we're projecting $15,715,000. So that's pretty significant as compared to previous years, okay? And like I explained earlier, those are based on the numbers that we have from 2019 actual, but some additional things play into that as well. So summer, historically, we've had about $170,000 in revenue. We've basically supported programming through the district. This past summer and this summer that we're leading up to, we'll be supporting Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center community programs, Rec on the Go, plus we have 10 curbside sites slated as well, because the USDA has extended the summer food service program for the entire year up until the end of next school year in 2022. So we have that opportunity again. So our summer revenues have increased. They've went up to $840,000 in this projection. This past year was about $800,000. So that's part of it. And then the revenue increase as well per meal plays into that. Another big piece of this is this past year with summer, we're allowed to serve meals on weekends and have food available for kids to take home. So right now, to the best of our understanding, in the summer meals program, that's an option for us. We're seeking clarification from MDE, who has reached out to USDA probably a month ago. Sometimes things are slow moving, but we're under the assumption and assuming that we will be offering weekend meals, having them available for kids again. So that's another piece of this revenue increase. So with revenues increasing, our expenditures are going to increase from supplies, from food costs, from labor costs, et cetera, over the summer especially. So in 2022, we're looking at, ultimately, we want a 12% target for our fund balance. At the end of 2022, in this adopted budget that we're looking at, we're going to be at a 28.88, so increasing our fund balance by $748,000 roughly is the projection. And then, so that's really 2022. And if you look towards 2023 through 2026, on 2023, we carried over the $15 million in revenue and the 15 in expenditures. And the reason we did that is so that we could highlight that in red, the $3 million reduction in revenues and the $3 million roughly in expenditures. Because it says known adjustments to revenue, but really it's an assumed adjustment to revenue. We're assuming that once we hit that 2023 year, that we're going to be back on the National School Lunch Program. And ultimately, meals won't be free. Our summers will scale back a bit. We won't be able to allow to send those weekend meal homes, et cetera. So what we're looking at is kind of a reset back to that 2017 through 19 trend that we've seen with roughly a $13 million revenue and roughly a $12 million expenditure. So that's the reset that we're looking at from 2023 through 2026 in essence. So with that in place, we don't really see any foreseen reductions in operations, forced reductions to maintain that 12% fund balance. Across the board, we're looking at a projection of 36, 35, 31, and then in 2026, having a fund balance of about 25.6%. So that is an overall recap of the 2022 and then 2023 through 26. Any questions or comments?
Start with Director, excuse me, I'll start with Director Douglas.
Thank you. I do have a question. Could you please just give us a brief explanation of the difference between the National Food Program and the USDA program, please?
Yep. So the National School Lunch Program is federally and state funded. So the National School Lunch Program, it's a blended rate. So we're reimbursed based on the status of a child, if they're paid, if they're free, or if they're reduced. So we get reimbursed based on their eligibility, and then also what families might pay for the food. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is with the National School Lunch Program, we're not able to provide meals on weekends, and our summer, there's a lot of waivers in place now with summer programming, where National School Lunch, we're not allowed to have a parent pick up the meal for them. In National School Lunch, a child has to get the meal, they need to eat it on site there, they can't take it home with them. So that summer food service program has a higher reimbursement rate. It's fully funded by federal, it's not funded by state reimbursement, and summer gives more flexibilities really for where kids can eat. They don't have to necessarily be in a school building. There's a lot of nuances depending on where you can operate summer, based on free and reduced populations, based on is there a program taking place, is there alternate learning that's supporting the meals, things like that.
So could you explain the USDA program, like the difference? Like, I guess what I'm wondering is, it appears on this Basin Tactics that the USDA were getting a greater reimbursement. Is that a special circumstance because of COVID?
Nope, it's basically, we're operating under the summer food service program or the seamless summer, and the summer program, whichever one you choose, over a National School Lunch Program, the reimbursement rate is always higher, just to encourage really districts to participate in summer so that more food is available for kids, and also help offset the costs because summer is a little bit more difficult to operate.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is the funding is greater, and maybe I misunderstood, but it sounded like you said that we were using the USDA during the school year right now.
Correct.
Can you explain why that's happening, or why we don't do that normally, and what the benefits or implications are?
Yeah, so we don't do it normally. We don't use the USDA program normally because we were allowed to do it during the pandemic because meals are free for all. Whereas in the National School Lunch Program, meals are not free for all, and they're only free for kids based on filling out a free and reduced application and qualifying. So that's essentially why we've been on the summer food service program for the past year and a half. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that the reason that we had that and we had greater revenue is specifically because of the unique circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Correct.
Not because we're choosing not to utilize this program that gives us a greater revenue.
Right. We have the choice to operate a National School Lunch Program, and some districts are, but we took advantage of the offering from the USDA to operate in it so that we could expand meal possibilities and also increase revenue.
Thank you.
Yep.
Director Simons.
I don't have any questions, very thorough and clear, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Thank you for what you do for our students in your program. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to thank all our staff, 130. They've been up and down all year for the past year and a half and changing models constantly. It's been very stressful on them, but they've hung in there and done an outstanding job, so thank you.
Being a classroom teacher and having meals delivered to my room because of this year, I really appreciate your staff, so please pass it on from all of us.
And thank you all the teachers out there that have helped us make that happen, and principals, because I know it's not easy, so.
Thank you. Director Brooks.
One question, hopefully an easy one. I was wondering if you could go a little more in depth on the summer meal program. I know you talked about participation in Rec and Go. What is it?
Rec on the Go.
Rec on
through
the Go,
Brooklyn
yes.
Park and Brooklyn
Yep.
Center.
So yeah, just wanted to know sort of what the limitations are on that and what our plan is to get those meals out to families,
Okay.
even beyond Rec on the Go.
Yep. So we have 10 curbside sites that we're operating from June 14th through August 25th. We'll be at these 10 curbside sites from 10 o'clock in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon. We've marketed it via Twitter, Facebook, direct emails, direct phone calls. It's on our website. And from 10:30 to 1:30, families, and it's been made clear that a child doesn't need to be there. Adults can come pick up a bag of meals, basically breakfast and lunch for the day. On Fridays, we've got bags available 3 days, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday meals as well. So those are at 10 curbside sites. We're also supporting, I think we have 23 sites total throughout the district between curbside as well as math and reading program, Kid Stop, Camp Rocks, all sorts of different camps that are happening. So we're doing the curbside for the community. We're also supporting breakfast and lunch and snack for these district-led programs. And then we've also partnered this year, which is new, with Brooklyn Center, the city of Brooklyn Center, primarily their Rec on the Go, and they've got 7 sites that they operate Monday through Thursday, where they have kids come and they have programming for them, enrichment activities, and we provide breakfast and lunch for them as well. And then Brooklyn Park, there's an additional, I want to say 16 or 17 sites that's operating over the summer, basically the same style, Rec on the Go, enrichment activities, and we're providing meals, breakfast and lunch to support those kids.
Thank you. That's really all I had.
Okay.
Yep.
Director Grady.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing to keep our families fed. I am wondering, is it possible, you said that the summer program will go away, is it possible to continue that going forward? Because I would love for the food need to go away, but I don't know if that's a safe assumption.
Yeah, I don't know if it will or not. I think that's really up to legislation and what they come up with. If they decide that, after school year ends 2022, if they extend that or if they make it a permanent thing. I know there's rumor that, people are talking about it, but I can't say which direction it'll head.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to say one thing,
Yep.
sorry. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I think that the program, breakfast, lunch, it's really a lifeline, to our communities and our students. And I think just not even because of the pandemic, through the pandemic, but before that, I just saw the creative ways that you and your team really reached out to all of our various communities, and even so now. So I just think it's really well thought out, and I really appreciate all the work that goes
Thank
into
you. Yeah, I'm blessed to have a great team, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Severson Hall.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Severson Hall, Executive Director of Community Engagement, and I will be reporting on the Community Services Fund, Fund 4, which includes all the community education programs. And we'll start with the good news. Community Ed is still standing. I'm happy to report that. If you remember, a year ago, it was a tough report, right?
Yeah.
So we are glad to be standing. We're glad to be reopening. I'll touch upon that a little bit. I think it's safe to say these last 15 months had a significant impact on Fund 4. But as you can see on our, hopefully you're on the green Basin Tactics. So on the top line under revenues, and I'm going to cover a couple of years tonight just because I think it tells a more full story than when I typically just report on the current year or the upcoming year. We ended the 2019 year with our highest revenue ever in Community Ed at $19.8 million in revenue, which we were thrilled about because for us, revenue means participation in more programs. We are estimating ending this year in the $12 to $13 million range. This is a 40% drop in revenue in just a 2-year period. So that speaks to the significant impact that these last 15 or 16 months have had in this fund. As a reminder, in typical years, participation fees make up approximately 65% of our revenue, and our fee-based programs were the programs most impacted by the pandemic. One thing that we were grateful for is that we maintained our funding from local, state, and federal government funding streams with ABE, ECFE, school readiness, and what's called general community education. So that was helpful in a year that was pretty rocky. And you can also see on the bottom of the page in the white section under the fund balance summary, overall fund balance drops from $3 million in 2019 to $2.1 million in 2020, and we're estimated to end at shy of $1.9 million in 2021, and back up to almost 2.4 in 2022. So this is a little bit of bouncing around, right? So this isn't kind of a steady line. So I just wanted to make note of that. Restricted for community education programs drops from $426,000 in fund balance in 2019 to a year ago, we were down to $49,000 in fund balance in that area, which is extremely low. We will rise to about $210,000 or 2.5% in 2021, and we're estimating to go back up to closer to $900,000 or 7.5% in 2022. In our restricted for early childhood school readiness and ABE, this goes from $2.6 million in 2019 to $2.1 in 2020, 1.7 in 2021, and projected to be 1.4 in 2022. And one of the reasons I separate those two is funds can only go one direction in community ed. So you can't take restricted ABE, ECFE fund balance and move it into general community ed restricted, but you can the other way. So I think a year ago we added some line items on our Basin Tactics to highlight that since our fiscal picture started to look so different. Briefly, some key action levers we've taken these past 15 months that I know most of you are aware of. We've had program elimination or suspension of programs, significant staffing reductions, leaving positions unfilled, and significant expenditure reductions to the tune of approximately $6 million of reductions in expenditures. We have also had revenue help, which is, I want to highlight as well. A year ago, we did a $1 million transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 4. This year, we'll be receiving $834,000 in ESSER funds to cover the cost of emergency childcare for Tier 1 qualified workers, which Community Ed supported these last 15 months. And one thing I don't know that this group is aware of, our team was on the lookout all year for grants that might pop up in the community. And we secured 2 of those this year, which we were excited about. $59,000 from the city of Brooklyn Park, who chose to use some of their dollars that they were granted to support people providing childcare, whether you were family childcare provider, center-based, or school-based. So thank you to City of Brooklyn Park. And also kudos to Christy Johnson, our Kids Stop coordinator, who applied for and we received $357,000 in a public health grant through the Department of Human Services, since Kids Stop was considered a certified childcare provider during this time. So those were significant funds that we were able to secure that are outside our normal funds that we have in community ed. So I wanted to highlight our staff effort and also the folks who chose to make the dollars that they received available to others, which I think is tremendous. Some reopening updates. Director Simons gave you a glimpse into that at our last board meeting on her report. But we have started opening up our programs this spring and summer, which we're excited about. They are, as Director Simons mentioned, they are opening at different participation levels. And I won't go into all the factors of why. You can probably guess, right? But our 2 biggest summer programs are Kids Stop and Enrichment. And summer Kids Stop is at about 50% of pre-pandemic enrollment. And it's our largest program, by the way, Kids Stop, our biggest revenue generator. And summer enrichment is gangbusters, 90 to 95% pre-pandemic. So that's probably our leader in opening back up. We're also thrilled that we're bringing back some staff positions we didn't have last summer. Between Kids Stop, we've probably brought back about 30 more employees than we had last summer. And then targeted services and Camp Rocks, those were 2 programs that were suspended. So last summer, we had 0 employees in those 2 program areas, and this summer, we have 150. So we're at about 175 of our 225 summer casual positions have returned this year. So not full speed, but certainly less dire than last summer. A couple of final items in the gray tactics area under projected 2023. You can see we are estimating our participation will increase revenue to the tune of $1.7 million and expenditures 1.5. And right below that, you also see where we anticipate bringing back some of the positions we eliminated at an expense of approximately $400,000. Now, I'm gonna call these, I don't know if this will make Ron nervous, educated speculation, okay, is what I'm gonna call it. Not normal, I don't think I've used that term in 10 years of budget presentations, but it's honestly not super easy to predict what participation is going to look like or how quickly it'll come back. We had 7 straight years of growth from 11 million in revenue to 19.8. And so now it's hard to guess how quickly we'll kind of climb back up the ladder. So, but I think early projections are we're hoping that we're going to see some growth. And I've used the analogy, just because the restaurant reopened doesn't mean it's back to full seating, right? So that's kind of where we're at. We're being conservative on how we bring people back based on participation numbers. I've mentioned some of the folks we have brought back, and everyone we've brought back so far works directly with students, and I do not anticipate bringing back the 5 management positions we eliminated or the 3 office staff positions that we eliminated until our finances and participation are more secure. So that's currently my strategy in that area. So we are bringing forward a budget with a total fund balance at 15.6%. A reminder that the restricted community ed budget this year is $209,000, which is around 2%, with our fiscal 22 estimate at $969,000, which is 7%. Our goal is to have both restricted CE and restricted EC ABE between 7 and 15%. So we obviously are in a better position than we were a year ago with only $49,000 in restricted, but we still set that as our target point. And in summary, overall, we're very proud of the work we've done these past 15 months to still provide opportunities for children and adults as our circumstances have changed, while carefully managing our resources. Special thanks to Mike Hewler and Carrie Cabe and our community education coordinators who were diligent throughout this year as we changed models on keeping a watchful eye on our tight resources, and as I highlighted, looking for and securing additional funding. So that's my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Director Grady?
No questions. I just want to say thank you so much for sticking it out through the year and providing essential childcare as we move through this pandemic. It's essential for our economy and for things to be opening up, so thank you.
Thank you.
Director Brooks?
No, I don't have any questions. Back to your restaurant analogy, it'll be interesting to see how many of our families, parents, actually end up having to go back into work, into the office. I know so many, just in my network, don't necessarily have plans to go back. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts this program and what sort of innovation that drives from it as well, if we aren't able to get too far beyond the current 50%. So, but yeah, I want to echo what Director Grady said, and thank you for continuing to push for those grant opportunities and continuing to keep this program running. So.
Yeah, thank you, Director Brooks. Definitely, we're hearing from our families, and even on our own team, without naming names, of course, significant others who've been told, you're reporting back to the office in July, you're reporting back in January. Don't ever plan on reporting back, right? We're going away from that model. So I think certainly locally, but also nationally, I think the field of childcare is going to be interesting to watch, because that's obviously childcare predominantly serves working families. And if the work the way folks' work has changed, it only makes sense that that field might be changing. So we'll see. Now, people are, maybe they aren't utilizing childcare, but they're certainly jumping on the enrichment opportunities, right? So that might be a shift there. We don't know yet. I agree, Director Brooks, but that'll be something, that was one of the things I promised not to go down the deep end on, but that's one that I'm kind of watching on what might happen, so.
Director Mosquito-Jones?
Well, this community ed gal says, thanks for everything. I love
Yeah.
the innovation. I love that we're still here. I mean, many of my colleagues in other districts in the state, there's no community ed program anymore.
Yeah.
So thank you for toughing it out and finding creative ways, and especially thank you to Christy. Hello, $350,000. Go her. And and thank you, Brooklyn Park. So that's amazing. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Simon?
Yeah, no, Brian, I know it's been a really difficult past year plus, and I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your and the team's resourcefulness, the really resource conscious and good stewardship in this area. So I really appreciate that, and definitely can understand that the fluctuations with the summer kids stop, with the conversation on the way people are working. I know masks are still required, right, for Kids Stop through July 1st, because that's different than our other programs, and I think there's probably some issues there in terms of people wanting to enroll kids as well. I've heard a little bit about that, so just appreciate navigating the whole scenario. Right now, I do have one question. Are there any online enrichment classes, or did those increase?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Great question. So kind of like probably a lot of us in our workplace, we found things that were successful that we had never tried before, right? And we're going to continue to offer both face-to-face and online. It was popular. Folks enjoyed it. I think my speculation will be on the adult enrichment side, that'll be more popular. That's one of our lagging ones, but I think adults appreciated, well, probably for the same reason all of us like to do stuff online. I don't have to travel. I can wear my loungewear, I can participate, and I still get a lot out of it, right? So there's all those things. And we know that with our District 279 online offering we're doing next year, we have families who are choosing to have their students stay online, right? So there's clearly a market for folks who might like that option. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that too, Tanya, on how that might change. But yeah, we'll keep offering them because they've filled up, and so we obviously are a little more market driven than some of our other funds, but so if we have a class offering that filled up, it doesn't make any sense to eliminate it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Director Douglas?
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of comments. My first question, though, is actually not for you. It's for our technical person. If we could get this on the screen so our viewers can see this.
Oh, it just popped up.
Yeah, it just went down.
This Basin Tactics never showed up on our screen, so just for that. But aside from that, I just wanted to say that I have always seen a lot of innovation from you and this department, and the growth is really a direct result of you and your team. And it's been really impressive, especially over these last several months where we've really been faced with significant obstacles. And I'm really excited to see some of the new things that we're going to be looking for, and that what positive things might come out of it. Even if some things maybe go away or change, I can see that this team and this department is very responsive to the needs of the community in some of the most creative and exciting ways. And it's also, our community education program, I feel like, is one of our strongest assets in getting families to participate in the district and having that community engagement. So I just really appreciate the work of this team and you, and all of the unique things that have gone into specifically keeping things running and going this year, or this past year. So really just thank you, and congratulations on all the hard work and innovation that's happened. And I really am looking forward to some of the things that I think might be coming. And I like your new term, too, your educational speculation.
Educated speculation?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I do, I like that
Pat.
because it's hard to predict this, exactly like you said, it's a very difficult thing to predict. But you do have a lot of experience in this
Right.
area, and so I appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate everyone's kind words, and, our online parenting classes went great for early childhood. They love, so like I said, there's a number of areas that are, I think we're beyond just grasping for silver lining, and we're starting to try to build a foundation again. So I appreciate that, and I'll end my comments with gratitude to my team, gratitude to everyone in this room who's been supportive of me and our team in this last 16 months. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, and take care.
Okay, I have a question. Maybe I should start going first. I don't know. I echo what everyone said,
Yeah.
Brian. Everything everyone said. I do have a question. As we talk about just kind of how things are, potentially changing for families, some people may be working from home, not, or working remotely. With our community ed, are there scholarship programs, or how do some of their enrichment activities, are they open? Is there a sliding fee scale, or how do we address that?
Yes, it'll
There
be
is a
hard to
scholarship.
answer it. ECFE has a scale year-round for all of their classes. For some of our school year programs, we take some of the fees that we get throughout the school year, and for instance, Camp Rocks is a great example, right? That's 900 students participating at minimal to no cost. So sometimes we scholarship for summer programs. We always have assistance available for families who ask for it. So we have kind of a balance. That's where some of our general community education levy dollars come from that we can utilize for that. So there's kind of a range depending on the program, Kelsey. So some programs are free, some are reduced fee, some are full fee. So that's a good question because it might change as we ramp up. It might have to change some of our ways we think about fees and bringing people back. And certainly this last year, we waived a lot of fees at different times because things changed so dramatically for people, based on different models and that. Or it sounds obvious, but when students had to quarantine, we didn't charge them for childcare. Just doesn't mean that's what fee-based childcare did throughout the nation, but we're trying to help people out and do the best we can, so it's a good question. And partnerships with the FACE department are going to be important in upcoming years, too.
And I was kind of talking along the lines of like theater or like sports, because I think those are the kind of those enrichment activities that so many students end up missing out on, because if you're in a big family, or, it's that extra cost, and I just was wondering if we provide scholarships or any opportunities so we can get more participation across the board from our families.
Yeah, and how about if I follow up with a little more in-depth fee structure with all of you, because, there are like 9 program areas, and they're all, their fee structures are all different based on if they actually receive any kind of additional support outside of fees even. So like Kid Stop's a great example. They're a 90% fee-based program, because they only get, well, I shouldn't say only. They get support for ensuring that we serve kids with additional needs in childcare programs, but it's very small compared to an ABE where you get the funding from the state, right? So there's a wide range on even the program areas. But I can give a more detailed summary to the school board on that, no problem.
All right, awesome. Thanks,
right.
Brian.
Chair Dustin, can I just add on?
Yeah.
I won't repeat everything that everyone said, and I really appreciate you acknowledging the hard work. This was a department that was pretty decimated a year ago. We had a really hard conversation as a group a year ago, and I really want to commend Brian for his leadership. With so much stress on his department, he's really led with some calm and a can-do attitude. And I remember back when we were sitting in the room March 15th, and you had 2 days to create a child care program that didn't stop since March 17th, and you had to reinvent how to do it, and do it in a way that still felt safe and welcoming through the whole year. So tremendous effort on part of your team, knowing that you had to eliminate a lot of positions in your department, as you covered earlier, and still found some creative and innovative ways to do, well, to stay open, like you said.
Yeah.
And then to see you come out of this with some real planful, thoughtful intention and growth is really commendable. So you survived some wild swings, and I know it took a toll on a lot of people. So thank you for your leadership.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're at the last fund, the capital fund, Basin Tactic. The bottom left corner of this document shows our 10% fund balance, and our target remains the same. In the bottom right corner, the arrow is pointing to a 0% revenue and a 0% expenditure projection assumptions for fiscal years 23 through 26. Moving up to the purple section, we've now added the adopted fiscal year 22 column, which has been updated with our revenue and expenditure budgets, as well as added the fiscal year 26 to the projection model. And then moving to the gray tactics section for revenues, we have the capital tech levy, which shows the 10-year technology levy, which also ends in fiscal year 24. And the model assumes that the technology levy will be renewed for fiscal year 25 and 26. And we have that note on the bottom of the page. And then the expenditure tactics include operational reductions starting in fiscal year 25 through 26, which are to slow down the spend down of fund balance as we reach that 10% minimum fund balance level. And then the other item that's in your packets tonight is the larger budget document. And the budget document is a resource for this next fiscal year. The budget document will be posted to the district's website after the board's approval on June 22nd. It contains 5 sections. There's an introductory section, which includes an executive summary, which provides yet another review of the adopted 22 budgets and our model. It has an organizational section with district information, as well as organizational complements for each fund. The financial section, which has key policies and graphical displays. And then our information section, which is the section we just reviewed with all of you, as well as some enrollment projections and then staffing resource allocations. And then it concludes with our benchmark comparisons with our financial benchmark districts. So with that, are there any questions from the board?
Anybody else have any other questions? No, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say that this document that you're going to post to the website is very thorough? No, I mean, this is the first time this is new, right? Did I miss it?
Don't say it in front of me, but-
I know, right? Here I am in public admitting that I didn't remember it.
Yeah. It's a document that we have always had, but it's been greatly enhanced with the adoption of the long-range financial planning budget
Sure.
process that we implemented a number of years ago. But every year we do put a little bit more information in there, so
Yeah, it's much more thorough than I've ever seen. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Very well laid out. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're moving on to our next agenda item. Thank you, board members, for your questions. And if there is any additional information you'd like us to follow up on, please don't hesitate to ask. As we transition here to our next presentation, I'm going to set a little bit of a stage here. I know Michael Lehan and he's making his way up there while we're getting ready. We had a little technical upgrade to our presentation here that is going to help us, I believe. So this is regarding our equity context analysis process results, and I'm going to just go back in time a little bit. If you recall, in the winter of 1920, I was working on options and next steps for our district equity work, and that was when we made a decision to explore working with Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center. That was right around January and February, just a couple weeks before we went into shutdown in March. And once that happened, we placed a lot of that work on hold. But when we got to about May of this past spring, about over a year ago, we were able to move that work forward again, and knew that we were looking at a new landscape and how are we going to provide education and meet the needs of each and every student in a culturally responsive way with a focus on race and culture. And to kind of reground, we looked at a lot of different options. We explored a lot of different options, and had to really rethink how we were going to do this in a mostly remote way as we did this ECAP process this past year. One of the changes that did occur was our new structure in having an assistant superintendent of equity and achievement. And so when Michael came on board in that position, one of the first things we did was move this process forward, knowing that it would take time. And we really needed to develop capacity to get that done. And so Lisa Hartman agreed, and maybe you wouldn't do that now, but you agreed to come on board and really help facilitate this process throughout the year, over the course of the full year. So we're at a point now where we're able to share the results of that work, and I know Director Grady's been a part of this process throughout the year as well. And this a lot of, again, I'll acknowledge a lot of change of plans and how to get this work done in an ever-changing environment throughout the year. And we're really proud to get to this point of the process to share the results. I know there's a lot of detail in those reports that we attach for you, a lot of data, and it represents a lot of work that was done over the course of the year, and knowing that tonight's presentation is more of a high-level overview. But it really is setting the foundation for our strategic plan as we get that finalized in the coming next couple months. And just really proud of our team and their willingness to work with Midwest and Plains and step up to the challenges that were posed to us throughout the year. Because I think Midwest and Plains would even tell you they had to change their approach to how this ECAP process gets done during the year of a pandemic. So we will be taking this information and then integrating that with our TeamWorks International strategic planning process, using that equity-oriented strategic planning process and really blending the two together. So we're excited about that. We're one of the first districts to do that with the TeamWorks model. So there's a lot of ground to cover. I'll turn over to Mr. Lehan to start the presentation. So thank you.
I'll tell you what, Superintendent McIntyre, that was a really good riff right there, just as we transitioned. So thank you so much for that introduction and setting the context for this critical work that we've been engaged in. As Superintendent McIntyre stated, it's been a journey. It's been a journey of self-discovery. It's been a journey of being in relationship in a new and profound way with some of our community members, with some of our stakeholders, and certainly some of our colleagues throughout the district. The process has caused us to be deeply reflective about how we're showing up, how we're creating access, and how we are listening while we're leading. And so as we think about some of the information that's become available that's new to us, that's really about the listening leader, and certainly that's a book, but really just thinking about what sort of access, what is our awareness, what is our social capital then, and then what is the context for change. Those are some of the pieces that's really emerged throughout this process. So this evening, viewing audience, board members, Superintendent McIntyre, we're excited to really share a bit of what we've learned along this journey. So as we think about the outcome of the presentation, this is certainly an update of the process and really seeing the results of this deep inquiry process that we've gone through. I would also want to pause for a moment and really celebrate Director Grady as playing an intricate part of this process, lending her voice, lending her time, lending her passion to really challenging us and working and really co-creating with us around what this process is. So thank you for your time, thank you for your leadership, thank you more so for your passion, as that's going to be the critical element that really moves this work forward as well. Additionally, one of the outcomes for the presentation is for board members to understand how, as a district, we've made meaning of this data and what our next steps are. Early in some of our meetings, we really talked about what is the grounding, what is the questions that we need to ask and find and search answers for. So as we think about creating an equitable system, a system in which each young person's brilliance is seen, valued, and heard in a meaningful way, we have to ask ourselves this question, this essential question right here. What is it about our system, people, policies, and practices that is resulting in inequitable outcomes for our scholars? What does that look like? And that's a deeply reflective question. That question also requires a high level of vulnerability and self-reflection. I celebrate each of those members, and I'll name them at the end of this presentation, who engaged in this process, came humbly forward to demonstrate and model that vulnerability so that we can begin to understand and unpack this experience. I'm going to pass it over to Lisa at this time, but I also want to take a moment just to celebrate my colleague, Lisa Hartman, throughout this process. I really just appreciate the opportunity to work with you and collaborate with you, and I can tell each of you, board members, viewing audience, Superintendent McIntyre, that we would not be in the place that we are today without Lisa's leadership during this process. So thank you, Lisa, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. To your comment, Corey, if I would have known what a fabulous year it was, I would have been coming and knocking on your door and saying, is there any way that I could be asked to help with this process? It's been amazing. I think it's really important because of how different this process is, that you understand some of the concepts and so that we can, you can understand fully how we got to our recommendations. And it is a lot of information, and so I created a cheat sheet for all of you on page 281 to 283 of the board packet, so you can kind of see it all summarized together and go back and forth. That's how my brain works. But to start out, I think it's important that working with the MAP Center, there are some basic concepts that we learned, and one of them is that how they define educational equity. And they use that through four pillars of access, representation, meaningful participation, and positive outcomes. And as you get into the data reports, I'm sure that you perused those hundreds of pages of data reports. That's how things are organized through those four different pillars. And access is defined as not just the ability to enter into a program, but also measuring the involvement, who's involved with it, and then who's receiving the full benefit of the program. So it goes very deep. Representation is that we have presence in decision-making and content versus an opportunity to simply be informed. So that as we're talking about multiple perspectives and amplifying the voice of our historically marginalized groups, it's not to bring them here to get some input from them and then inform them of what happens. It's really to engage them in decision-making and content. Meaningful participation comes to agency and empowerment to allow all of our stakeholders to contribute in effectual ways. And then positive outcomes is a focus on solutions that benefit all stakeholders and result in equitable outcomes at a high level. The next slide, I just want to remind you of how intensive this work has been. We have two terms, ECAP, which was the Equity Capacity Analysis Process, which helps inform the equity-oriented strategic planning that we're going to be working on now. And so we started in August, and we had key stakeholders come to the table representing community, parents, some teachers, and a lot of cabinet and higher people just to have an idea of what we were venturing into and having them be able to inform us of who needed to be invited to the table to be part of what is called an ECAP review team. And the ECAP review team, after that, we took a look at recruiting and making sure that we had a subgroup or this team. The ECAP team ended up to be 21 members, and I'll talk about that later on in the presentation. And then from that, we also identified what was called an ECAP data collection team. And we all received training on the ECAP process and the work that we were doing in November. Then that small group from the ECAP review team also stepped forward and said that they would like to be trained on the equity-oriented strategic planning process that the MAP Center runs. And so we had some additional training sessions in January and February. And I'll tell you, they were very intense and very informative and really changed the way that I think about equity, education, and how we truly engage our community in meaningful work. We had to start with data gathering during January and February. It was very intensive, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the ECAP review team just most recently met on May 12th and May 19th to participate in a co-interpretation and prioritization process. I want to remind the board that the ECAP process is not an audit. Traditionally, when you have some kind of an audit, you have an outside organization come in do survey data gathering, and then they go away and they make meaning of the data. That did not happen. The Map Center takes us through a process where we used our own personal experiences along with the data points that were gathered, and we're the ones that made meaning. And I had a really hard time getting my head around how that was going to work. And I want to remind the board that there was a lot of questioning along the way, and I brought this up in other sessions, because when you bring in parents and you bring in community members and all the different roles and social identities that we came in, it's not the traditional people that you would have sitting and making meaning of our data and making recommendations, right? So there's this constant conflict, there's this constant thing is that this is intensive and we're doing a lot of work, and are our voices going to be heard? And as we've gone through this process, I'm just really happy to say that it all came together on May 12th and 19th. I have a much deeper understanding of what this is, and I have appreciated the commitment that Superintendent McIntyre has made, that we are going to continue to work with TeamWorks on the equity-oriented strategic planning and merging those two things in a crosswalk. May 20th, we were able to meet with the high-level Map Center people, along with Christine Roboleski from TeamWorks, and Michael was part of that meeting, me and I believe Rob was there as well. And we had a chance for TeamWorks to talk to the Map Center and for us to talk about what are those touch points and how can these two processes come together. So I'm very excited about that. So we are now ready to work this summer to engage and finalize strategic planning work with additional stakeholder feedback. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking you through what ECAP is, and then the process that we used and how we arrived at those recommendations. So I want to remind people, the data sources were very, very rich and very different than the way and methodologies that I have seen used in the past. There were 3 different reports that you have, there's pages of them. One is a student data profile, and that's the quantitative data that we tend to be familiar with, and it was obtained publicly through MDE or information on our website that the Map Center could find easily. And it would include, not limited to, but things like student achievement data with MCA and ACT scores, graduation rates, teacher demographics, behavior and attendance data, kind of the typical measures that we use for student achievement. And then what happened is that we had a stakeholder survey gathering data that happened in January and February. And I want to remind the board that every single community, every single stakeholder in our community had the opportunity to give us and participate in this. So it was a huge data source. It included an administrative survey. All the other staff had a different survey. Parents and caregivers were invited to attend, and we translated every piece of information from English to Spanish, Vietnamese, Hmong, and Somali. All students in grades 4 through 12 also had the opportunity to take part in this survey data, so it was very rich. And then the final piece that was really important to me, and I want to remind you that the guiding question turns us from taking a look at outcomes in student achievement and some of those things we measure, into really taking a look at what is happening within our organization to the people, policies, and practices. And so in order to do that, there's a school review data process that really yielded us some very, very meaningful data about what's actually going on in our classrooms and our schools. So that included teacher observations. I think there were over 100 teachers that were observed. Teacher interviews, over 100 teachers interviewed, and then school walkthroughs in 8 identified sites. And if you want to be reminded of the 8 identified sites, it was Basswood, Zanewood, Oakview, Osseo Middle School, Brooklyn Middle School, Park Center Senior High, and Osseo Senior High. And once again, those reports are in there. So when we arrived at May 12th, kind of telling it a story, we received these documents or these data reports, and what we learned is that they were, all of the data had been evaluated through 7 equity domains, and they refer to them as letters of the alphabet. So the first domain is climate, and they describe an equitable climate, and if there's equity, is that all members of the learning community experience safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environments where there's a recognition and valuing of students' differences, and the creation of spaces for families and students to participate in decisions that affect their learning trajectories. And I also, in your packet, you can see the research that that's based on. The domain B is an environment and resources, where resources are distributed equitably and care is taken to ensure authentic representation of diverse people are present in learning spaces and in learning materials so that students are provided with what they need to benefit from high-quality, culturally responsive education opportunities. The next domain is leadership and governance, and that is that there is shared leadership and decision-making structures that are present at multiple levels of the district and are organized to ensure participation of diverse stakeholders. There is an expressed and demonstrated focus on addressing systemic inequities. D, continuous improvement. The district engages in inquiry using multiple types of data to make explicit the links between student outcomes, policy, and adult practice, with a focus on the adult practice and the policy. Data-informed inquiry and continuous processes are used to determine who is not benefiting from our current policies, practices, and structures, and then on improving learning opportunities and outcomes for all students, with particular attention to addressing the inequities faced by historically marginalized students. Instruction and assessment. Curriculum, instruction, and assessment practices support all students in identifying and using tools and knowledge resources from multiple communities for critiquing the status quo and empowering students to make decisions that will lead to social change towards more just communities in and out of school. Instruction is differentiated to facilitate use of various modalities for acquisition and generation of knowledge or skills through experiences and study. F is student engagement. All students are active participants in their own learning and are engaged in high quality and rigorous learning opportunities. Students' academic, social, and personal growth are all deemed important outcomes. And I just want to say that again, because I think we're doing some work around the academic, but the social and personal growth also is included here. And the final one is family and community engagement, which is defined as the district cultivates and maintains mutually beneficial relationships with community members, parents and caregivers, and community-based organizations, specifically those representing historically marginalized groups, to ensure that district and school decisions represent and incorporate the knowledge and resources of all they serve. So that's quite a bit, right? But as we go through the data, if you have a chance to dive in, everything is organized along A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so you can refer back to that, which is why I gave you the cheat sheet. So I wanted to go through just a couple of quick examples of pulling from it so that you can quickly get into understanding what these reports are about. And this first one, the next several slides, show examples of how data were presented from the 3 different data sources: the student profile, the stakeholder survey data, and then the school review. This first slide, once again, now further going deeper, each one of those 7 domains had different indicators on a rubric that we looked at, and I'll give you a sample of a rubric. So there are indicators under there. So we have like A1, A2, A3 under the first one, which I believe was climate. And not all the indicators had the same, or domains had the same number of indicators, but it's just to kind of get your head through it. So this slide is a graph from the school review report, and I picked one that really shows data through the walkthrough. There's also included, after a graph like this, there will be qualitative narrative that they chose from the interviews that were scripted from all of the teachers to kind of show some trends and kind of support what those areas are looking at. The indicator is stated and then linked back to one of the 4 pillars of equity. So I think I chose A3 to kind of focus on, and A3 would just be climate, and it's the 3rd indicator, which you can see at the top. I can't read it from here, but I know that this particular one of A3 was tied back to the pillar of representation. One other piece of information I want you to have as we go through, because it'll make sense on the slides, is that research on practices indicate that for something to be fully implemented in a system, we need to see 80% of the people in the organization using 80% of the strategies, practices, steps, and at 80% of the time. So 80% becomes really important, and so you can see on the slide that Michael has up right now, that there is a gold line that goes at the 80% level, which then kind of is, you're able to take a look at that, and then we can see that the data collected for the slide before, I think we were at 64.3% of the time, of that mark. Are you on slide 9, Michael? I think you are.
Yes.
So there are charts that we would get in this. Now I'm moving from the school review data into charts from the different surveys. And so the first one is that it's still on this A3 indicator under climate. And this first chart is stakeholder surveys. So the stakeholder survey, I think this one was parents and caregivers. And so you can see with that solid line where we were, and the graph represents the result. Oh, this was the staff survey, sorry. So it's just as a quick view, you can see where the staff had us ranked, which was it about 70% implementation, more or less? Or 60?
60.
Yeah. And then the next slide, Michael. The same data, but this one is from A3 for climate, but this was the result of how students ranked that. And then from the final graph here, same thing, it's A3, but this graph represents the results of indicator A3 from the parent and stakeholders survey. In your data report, all three of those data graphs would be in the same area so that you can quickly see where there's a difference between how staff is reporting out and how parents are. And so that was an important part of our co-interpretation, is taking a look at what were the multiple perspectives there. Slide 12, the next slide, is an example from the student profile. The student profile, because it's qualitative data and it's from public sources, did not have any data that was correlated to the climate, because we don't publish climate surveys, or it's not accessible easily for the Map Center. But I just wanted you to see that a sample graph, this is from the data student data profile, and it is correlated with domain B, which would be environment and resources. And this was from indicator 1, which states more experienced qualified teachers and support staff are equitably distributed across buildings such that every student has access to effective educators. And so you can see that there is quite a difference in our district when we move from school to school about who is standing in front of our students by those indicators of qualification, master's degrees, years of experience, et cetera. All right. And then we move to the next slide, which I think is really important, because I talked about the fact that they don't come back to us and say, this is what this data mean, and this is what you should do next. They really want us to, and helped us participate in a co-interpretation. And their co-interpretation process helps partners understand and interpret data within a larger collaborative needs assessment that uses the power of the data that we collected and our own partner experience to make decisions about what matters most. And what I got from that, and what I thought was so strong, is that because we had an ECAP review team that included members from as many different social identities as we could find, including roles, ethnicity, race, ability, gender, religion, and sexual orientation, we had rich dialogues, because we could take a look at the parent results, and we had parents there that could speak about their experiences. We had teachers and ESPs at the table. We had different roles, and so when we talked about people that are working in the front line with students, we could also base experience that somebody had, like maybe teaching EL students in different groups. And so I think Tamara maybe will speak about that, but it was very intense conversations, and that was awesome. So slide 14, I just want to talk a little bit about how did we come to the evaluations that we did, and I think that process of co-interpretation was very important for you to understand. We were given a rubric that had each of the 7 domains, and then it had the indicators, so it'd be A1 through 7, for example. I think B1 through 8, they're varied. But through those, they took our ECAP review team, and they divided us into 2 different groups. And each domain also, under the indicators, they were clumped together. So in domain A, there were 7 indicators, but they kind of had them into 3 categories. And so I don't know if you can see up there, the rubric example. We could go there, and the first one is, it tells us what the definition of the indicator was. In the second one, the second column there, it tells us what report we can go to and get the data. So you can see from this one that there were actually 3 different reports, and so that was the triangulation of that. And our job was, we divided into 2 groups, and we took half of the domains, and then we had conversation about the 80%, and we had to make a determination about whether we looked at the indicator, we looked at all the data that was related to it, we had a discussion about different points of view, and we had to determine a rating. If it was partially in place, if it was not in place, or we had to come to consensus about whether it was, what's the third indicator, Michael, can you help me out?
In place, partially in place, and not in place.
Okay, thank you. So you can see in that final column that as we worked in my group, I was in group 1, Michael was in group 2, we also then captured as much as we could notes about the observations we were making and how we came to consensus on what we were doing for the indicators. And then after that, what we did is that we exchanged the rubrics. And so group 1 sent it to group 2, group 2 sent it to group 1, and we re-looked at them, and then we marked the areas that we had questions on, that we weren't quite sure that we agreed with the way that the other group assessed it. And then we came together in the 2 groups, and we had a conversation about the indicators that we did not agree on, and we discussed it until we came to consensus. It was very, very rich dialogue that we have captured in those note sections that we can go back to. Then the final step was the entire ECAP team needed to come to consensus and determine if our district's performance in the domain was, and you can see the yellow across the bottom, we had to say that we were beginning, and there's a definition there of what beginning is, whether we were developing, whether we are approaching the standard, or whether the standard, we're at standard. And so you can see those indicators so that you understand. What I want to just simplify and come to is that the ECAP team came to consensus that in each and every domain, we are at the beginning. So for all 7 equity domains, we're beginning, meaning that we have some things partially in place, but the majority of them were not in place yet. And then the prioritization piece for equity-oriented strategic planning is that we were led through a process where each person of the ECAP review team had a chance to come together, and we had individual votes, and we were given 3 kind of stickers, right, or place marks. We could put all 3 stickers on one domain that we thought was the highest priority if we wanted to, or we could take a look at those 7 domains and we could give to 3 individual ones, or we could use 2 and 1, that kind of system, right? And from there then, we took a look at the results, and we took a look at, through the ECAP team lenses, after looking at all this data and doing this process, about what we felt was the most important work for us to move forward with the equity-oriented strategic planning. The way it came out is that the ECAP review team believes that leadership and governance is the place that we need to start for our first priority, that climate would be the next one, and then continuous improvement would be the third one. This is a lot of information to digest, and I probably have already put you all to sleep, but there's another document that I prepared for you, and it's on pages 284 to 287. And as I indicated, under each one of this, there are various indicators, and we can't possibly tackle every indicator at once. So the ECAP team also worked, and through our conversations and taking a look at all that we did, we've highlighted the indicators that we think would be the most important places to kind of start and focus our efforts on. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Michael for next steps.
Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa alluded to, obviously, this is a ton of information, right? So there's this notion of being data rich and information poor, or potentially action poor. And so this is when then we really have to think about what are our action steps and how are we applying this? First, as we look at this triangulation of data, and this is what I'm talking about, kind of this notion of data rich, we've engaged conversations with Teamwork. So we have data points from them that is probably a year old at this point. We have the ECAP process, in which we're visiting with each of you tonight regarding, and then we're also doing this equimetrics survey that's actually, we have some really great response. We're at about 75% of a response rate system-wide. So we're going to have some really rich data to look at that. So as we think about what is our context, and the Teamworks data that they collected was prior to COVID. So we'll see how kind of the context has emerged based on this ECAP truth that we've seen, and then this equimetrics. Beyond this, we also know that we've done pulse surveys this year. We have the summary pulse survey for this spring, and we're looking at both the fall and winter as well. So that's a data point that we can begin to unpack. We've had listening sessions. Board has had listening sessions, and Corey has gone out to each of our high schools and had the opportunity to engage and listen to feedback from our scholars. And as I'm sure that he shared with each of you, it's pretty, there's themes that have emerged at each of those listening sessions as well. We've had the opportunity to engage some of our parent groups, such as APAC, and then we also know that we have the RISE committee. So there's all this accumulation of really good data points and this opportunity for us to co-interpret some of these data points. So that's the next step as we think about this data, this information, how are we making meaning of this, and then how are we applying this information. As we think about some of our immediate next steps, we're going to get the equimetrics data to us on June 14th. On June 15th, we have our system leaders advance. We're going to have the opportunity to engage further some of our leaders across the district about this equity context and ask some really intentional questions as we begin to think about what is our equity-oriented strategic plan, what are the things that we have to name in there. And then on June 16th, we have the opportunity to engage our RISE committee, in which we'll share some of this data and get some further feedback from them, from our community stakeholders, to ensure that we are leveraging some critical voices and revealing some inherent blind spots that I'll speak for myself as a leader within this organization, naturally I'm going to have. So that's the opportunity for us to be intentional, be reflective, and gather additional voices so that the work that we put forward is inclusive, responsive, and meaningful at each corner of our dynamic system. So as we think about some of the work that Teamwork has done, right, we talk about this whole system view. We think about culture, we think about work, and we think about organization. And I remind everybody that has the opportunity to view tonight or watch at a later date, the question, right, is what is it about our system, the people, the policies, and the practices that is resulting in inequitable outcomes for our scholars? And so as we think about the whole system view, there's the opportunity to think critically and do a deep dive within each of these bubbles, if you will, and think about what do we need to revisit, where are opportunities for growth, and how do we leverage the leaders within those systems, the leaders system-wide, to ensure that we're creating these opportunities. Also with Teamworks, we're talking about our strategic growth and change. What are some of the things that are coming into our system with this equity-oriented strategic plan? Naturally, there's going to be some new learning. So the challenge then is to how do we decide what needs to leave the system? What is no longer serving our purpose? Where are opportunities that we had some blind spots that are now revealed? And how can we enhance our product that we're providing for our scholars? So we have to include some equity-centric improvement part as part of our standard work. That we have to understand the difference between change readiness and change management, and most importantly, change resistance, right? Those are the pieces. So we're adding to some of the language that Teamworks uses, but we also have to be able to identify and respond when we see resistance to some of our work that we're trying to move forward. And then we have to be clear about our system's roles, responsibilities, who's responsible, and those relationships, right? We talk about relational capital. We know that in order to move work forward, relational capital is critical within systems. How do we leverage those relationships, and how are those relationships positioned meaningfully so that we can realize these critical results? So as we think about what's coming into the system, what's leaving the system, some of how we're going to activate and engage our vision. We've talked about vision cards over time, and that's in the development stage. We saw some rough drafts that have been shared with the board. Progress monitoring, that's another piece that we're going to, again, we'll have to be intentional about how we're centering equity and what does that look like? What is the language that we're going to use? How are some of the rubrics that we might develop? And then we have to begin to look at our department and school 3-year plans. How are we synthesizing how we do, what we do through an equity context? Whose voices is not centered? Whose voices have we not heard? And how might we create avenues in which we make sure that we center those voices? To do this, there's a moral imperative. There's a natural moral imperative to this work, right? Because as we think about resistors, those are naturally going to become. Sometimes when we put productive tension on people, that's uncomfortable. There's this notion of disequilibrium that invites a level of paralysis just based on the fact that, you know what, this is outside of my comfort zone and I'm not ready to move. I'm not ready to move in this direction. But we also understand that it's not about us as adults, it's about our scholars. It's about the fact that on Thursday of this week, we're going to see some graduation data that's coming out. Later this year, we're going to see some access data that's coming out from our EL scholars. We're going to see some of our MCA data. So we have some truths that we have to wrestle with, that we have to be meaningful. So then as we think about the fact of how can we create conditions for success for our scholars, there's a moral imperative that comes along with that. So as we think about being reflective and meaningful in the change that we're enacting, that we have to then level our relational capital, that we have to be reflective about what is our professional disposition as we're showing up and we're making and we're responsible for enacting change within our departments, within our school, within our system, whatever that looks like. What is our disposition and how are we modeling the expectations? We also have to understand what motivates us. I guarantee if what motivates at the core of each of our beings is the scholar who we love most, we all have that favorite scholar that we love most, if that's at the center of our actions, we know that we are going to realize we are going to do 80% of the things 80% of the time. We know that to be true. As I close down tonight, I just want to honor some more folks who lent their voice, their time. So the ECAP review team members, the ECAP data collection team, the teacher participants, and the stakeholders. We had some really good conversations. I know Corey had some conversations with some teacher participants who, after this, that we went out and observed. Corey created some time on his calendar to meet with them because there were stories, some opportunities for stories emerged. So there's some really authentic voices that emerged in this regard. As we think about conviction, and I'm sorry, I feel like you all are probably like, Leanne, every time you come up here, you got some sort of quote or something like that. But that's me, I apologize. I don't. But nonetheless, as we talk about conviction, and as I read this quote, there's also this fierce urgency of now, right? Dr. Martin Luther King talks about this notion of fierce urgency of now. With that on our hearts, we also have to think about the day that we plant the seed is not the day that we get to eat the fruit. So we have to be patient and we have to stay the course. However, if our moral imperative is aligned due north, and we are aligned to do 80% of the things 80% of the time, we're going to be able to realize that fruit before we know it. And that's the work that we have before us. At this time, Lisa and I open the floor to any questions and turn it over to Chair Dawson-Wilson.
All right, thank you so much, you guys. Wow. Good to see you, Lisa. Okay, I'm going to actually turn it over, or just start with Director Grady, since I know you've been so involved and a huge champion for this work.
Thank you. I want to first say thank you to Superintendent McIntyre for supporting and prioritizing this process, and that was, it was a huge lift this year with all of the other chaos going on. And thank you, Michael Lehan, Lisa Hartman, Rev Hillstrom, and the entire equity process team for all the work that you've done. Thanks for including me. The process was a really great way to listen and learn from our staff about the status of equity in our district. And I really appreciate how hard the whole equity team worked through the pandemic to complete observations, interviews, and take the time to carefully analyze and prepare the data for us as a school board to use in our strategic planning process. The ECAP process has given us a sound blend of qualitative and quantitative analysis and data triangulation to give us the best available data tailored to issues specific to our district. And some of this work was emotionally difficult because the data shows with clarity the fact that contrary to the Osseo District's mission statement, far too many of our scholars are experiencing a lack of inclusion, representation, and opportunities for meaningful participation. And far too many of our students do not feel safe and welcome in their school community. We can and we will do better than this. This is a call to action for us as a school board to develop a vision and a strategic plan that brings our people, policies, and practices into a place of alignment and accountability with the Osseo District's mission to inspire and prepare all students with the confidence and competence to achieve their dreams and to contribute to the community and engage in a lifetime of learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Grady. Director Brooks.
I also just want to say thank you to everyone that was involved in this process. This was huge, and this report, I mean, is so much here, so much that we can work with. And it's the fruit of so much labor from internal staff to community members. So I'm so appreciative for the thoughtfulness and the time that was put into getting us to this point. I think my questions are more logistical than anything, just really wanting to know more of what's to come. So I know sort of one question that I have, I guess for either of you is, can you sort of go over again how we got to the 3 priorities?
Yes, we did a process with the MAP Center that they facilitated where we went through these data reports with the fine-tooth comb. And then by consensus with all the members of the ECAP review team, that included community members, parents, and all of the different social identities, we had a discussion about, are we beginning partially those things, and then from there, we had the opportunity for every voice to be represented and to show where we thought and where we felt based on the data and based on our discussions, what would be priorities. All 7 equity domains are very important, right? But we wanted to identify at the request of the MAP Center 3 priority areas. And so this is a representation of after we each had our individual time to think about it and bring our voices forward. And so it was by and far, I think that the largest was leadership and governance. Climate came in second, and then the continuous improvement. Yeah, and there's a lot of data around that. And like I said, we can't tackle every indicator under all 3 of those priority areas all at once. And so we also had the opportunity to talk about where do we believe we need to go into equity-oriented strategic planning? What are the leverage points to really launch us? And so that's reflected in the report as well.
Thank
so
you.
Unlike most strategic planning or whatever, I think the TeamWorks talks about from the classroom to the school board. The Equity Center takes it one step further. It is from our children and our parent and caregivers up to the school board for them to have it. And so the group of people that were involved in data analysis and the way that we did it is an experience that I've never had before, where I really felt for the one and only time in my life that we really had representation and we had multiple perspectives and that there was meaningful participation in relation to each other that resulted in us doing work. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, if I can add, like, it was really hard to figure out how to prioritize this because we need help in all areas. And it was a matter of really trying to be strategic and where can we start first to get everything going.
I am certainly supportive of the 3 priorities. I just wanted, again, to hear the process of how we got there. I know that we all only have so much time and energy that we can put out at any given time. So, yeah, certainly supportive of that and all of the work to come. I think my second question is more along the lines of what sort of timeline do we have in place right now, or at least in mind, in terms of the development of that strategic plan and communicating that to the board and the public.
So I can give that to you right now if you'd like. This kind of in a short summary, this summer we'll be taking the Desire Daily experience work that we did with TeamWorks and the theory of action work that was done pre-pandemic and crosswalking that with what you just saw from the ECAP. That's work now that's in front of us this summer. June and maybe more August and September, we're going to be refining those vision cards because we'll have the econometrics data now as well. And what the board has in front of them in August and September is landing on our strategic roadmap. We've got a draft of those directions, and we need to really finalize those elements, so that'll be in probably some form of a retreat style, really dedicated time effort. And then once we have those, now we start operationalizing things with, as we get into that August-September window, refining the 3-year operational plan 1 year at a time. So you look at what are things we need to study a bit more, what are we going to be implementing, when does it get to standard work in that framework that we've had as draft for about a year. And that launches then department and school improvement plans. So everything's kind of a through line from the top through all the way down to the building level and having alignment all the way through that system. So we have another meeting tomorrow with TeamWorks to continue to integrate and map out the timeline and make sure that I also don't want to rush this part through. We need to be really intentional and thoughtful as we map out what are the actions now going to be, right? So we would have loved to have it done by July. I'm so impressed that this team got through it this year as fast as they did in the conditions we were under. So I'm okay with it being, as we're starting the year, we only missed it by a little bit, and really it required the kind of time. I think we had to make some additional meetings happen just to make sure we got through the information in a really authentic manner. So that gives you, and I'll send that out to the board as well, that little timeline I just walked through, but you can see we've been mapping that out.
Thank you. And I also agree that the amount of engagement in this process is unprecedented. And so, at the risk of, I don't want to minimize the engagement that has been done to this point, but I do really want us to be mindful about how we continue to engage communities, the community members, families, and students, as well as staff, in this process and throughout the strategic plan, not just in communicating updates and, the status of, the vision cards, but really being mindful about continuing to get those stories and those perspectives from them and making sure that along with the data that we are able to review through the indicators that the stories themselves are actually changing as well as we start to address some of these issues.
That is where our econometrics will help, because that'll be a progress monitoring tool, along with our family and community engagement team were embedded in this process. So it was really good, strong foundational elements that we can now take out through that department. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Mosqueda-Jones.
So there's a story that we tell in in intervention and prevention in this profession that I do in trying to prevent and early intervention about babies floating down a river and people trying to save the babies, and they come faster than we can save the babies. And I tried to convey this story about a year ago in another meeting that we had, when the reality is what we really need to look at is how are the babies getting in the river in the first place, right? And so when I hear this guiding question, what is it about our system, people, policy, and practices that's resulting in equitable outcomes for our students, I think, hallelujah, we're going to the other end of the river to find out how these babies are getting into the river, right? We're doing it, and I'm super excited about that. As you all know, I've been trying to go down this road for 30 years as a teacher, and I feel like I get stuck at that other end of the river quite often. And I appreciate the relational piece of all of this. We know from research that if we're ever going to make sure that we remove all the barriers, that relationship is key. It seems like we say it all the time, but it's really true. The representation that we're talking about with the community and the unprecedented engagement that you talked about, Lisa, I'm super excited about it because all the research that I've seen in tackling barriers has only been in involving our community to the level that we're now starting to involve our community, and I hope that it continues. I know that it will continue, and I hope that it continues, even at this building level for doing that. So I just wanted to say that. I wanted to know a couple of things. One, were there interpreters for the stakeholders during this whole process?
The stakeholder, we didn't have a need for interpretation of anybody on the ECAP review team. However, I want to remind that all of the stakeholder surveys, all the communication, all the reminders went out in 5 languages. And I think that that's unprecedented. And I just want to say the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center is going to be using that work so that they can share it with districts across the United States, obviously giving us credit. But they had never, they do this process all over the place, and we were the very first district that they ever saw that took the care for our community to make sure that they had as much access as possible through their native language. So thank you to the Equity Department and the bilingual assistants who helped us with that.
Yeah, I've really appreciated the increase in interpretations in this district lately. It's another question I had. Were students involved in that, in the ECAP team at all, or?
We did not include students on that, and it's something at the secondary level that we probably could have, but it was not a recommendation of the MAP Center. Because of the hours of time, I think, pulling them away from their studies and the amount of training. But their voices were absolutely included in the stakeholder survey. And then the other data point that we have to triangulate with, what I'm very excited about, is the desired daily experience. And Tamara, I think you and I have taken quite a big look at how are they aligning, and we're seeing the same trends. And so students were heavily involved in that data process.
And I would add to that is the listening sessions that
Absolutely.
Corey has gone through the last couple of weeks as well.
Yes.
Themes are emerging
Super appreciate that about Corey as a student listening sessions. We're going to plan them farther ahead next year so I can take a day off and go. The last thing I wanted to say is I can't tell you how much I appreciate that document, Lisa, on page 284, where you have the questions and it's very clear and gives us the quantitative and qualitative look at what we need to do and the questions that we need to ask. I think having these questions guiding us and continually questioning, are we actually doing this, is super helpful. So I just want to echo everybody with the greatest amount of appreciation for everybody that's been working really hard on these teams. I feel like we're taking off, and it's very exciting.
Thank you. Director Simons.
Yeah, thank you. This is quite the volume of work. Excellent data and insights. I think it's really going to be important that as we move forward, we're very crisp and clear on what we think, what root causes and contributors to that guiding question are the items that we're actually saying that we're going to solve, what the solution sets are and how they connect to solving that problem and how we're going to measure progress against that. So right now I feel like it's been a lot of data, some themes, but I'm not hearing this specific, and I know that's more coming in the next steps with the specific nature of this is the problem that we've identified that we're trying to solve in that as a specific beyond the guiding question. I'll need to understand more about the process that was used to prioritize the 3 areas before I would say I support those 3 areas. I think A absolutely makes sense to me when I look at climate, when I look at some of the content behind that in that section. I might have expected student engagement and outcomes and family and community partnership to have been more on the priority list. So I'm going to just probably want to understand that a little bit further, since those are things that we've been talking a lot about. And I think really ensuring that students own their learning and are engaged in high quality and rigorous learning opportunities as defined in F seem to be an opportunity area based on the data. So I just want to know, again, more how we prioritize those before supporting that. There's, at some point, I don't know what the right forum will be to ask questions about some of the actual data, content, and findings here. I don't know if that's appropriate for tonight or if there'll be a different place. A lot of the responses under climate, and I can see why that's prioritized, are a lot of external motivating factors instead of internal student motivating type of ideas or practices. Some of the, again, concerning information, and it's probably not appropriate to ask a lot of questions about that here, maybe in a maybe one-on-one or in a forum.
Well, I would say this to board members, it's so much to digest at once, right? So as you process through it, please just funnel those questions, to us so we can follow up with many discrete questions, I'm sure, because there's literally 100 pages of information in here.
Right.
That is a year's worth, and we're not even done, right? So I think I share your desire, Michael, Lisa, we all do, to get this into, kind of actionable things, because we've been at the collection and analysis phase for so long. So we're getting excited about, we're beginning to turn this into some tangible, concrete, measurable things, right? So we share your anxious feelings about getting there, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. All right, well, I'll save kind of my specific questions for another forum. Yeah.
All right, Director Douglas.
I too have a lot of really specific questions, and also I would like some more in-depth conversation about how we arrived at these priorities and I think what I would really like is an opportunity to have more of a robust conversation about the meat of this, because there's so much content here, and I think there's a lot of information that is difficult to digest without further context of how the conversation's developed and how we got to where we are right now, having not been personally a part of that process. I have a lot of questions, but I'm not really quite sure where to begin because there's so much information here. And I really appreciate the amount of work that's gone into it. It's very clear that it's really been thorough and aggressive in getting to addressing these issues and gathering data, and exactly what you said, Michael, earlier about being really data rich, but action poor. And I know that's where we're going, but I just have a lot of questions, and I think like an opportunity to either, meet with you or with Lisa Hartman or somebody who is really involved in the process to get a more in-depth conversation about how we got to where we are.
Sure, and if I may, and sorry, Director
Yeah.
Douglas, were you?
I'm done.
Okay. I would just say, and that's why we wanted to really highlight this notion of triangulation, right? So we can see if these same themes emerge across various measures. Not only the equimetrics or the ECAP or the TeamWorks review, but then also what is our pulse survey saying as well? What are our listening sessions saying? So I'm with you, quite honestly, there's a lot of data, so there needs to be this notion of just pausing and saying, okay, where can we connect these dots? And then, once we do that, we will be able to use equimetrics and adjust the questions that we ask going forward as a progress monitoring. So that's that triangulation that we're still in the processing doing, so we can achieve really what the both of you, Director Simons and Douglas, are really mentioning in this regard.
Thank you.
Well, this is a lot of work, like everyone else is saying, and I'm so glad that Lisa, you're on this team leading it with Michael, because I just know your heart and your passion around equity and really a systemic change that needs to happen for all of our students. So I really appreciate this. And, I guess I think, to me, I think there's seven equity domains. I think that just split hairs with like why one's a priority and not the other. They're all a priority. You just can't slice it like that. So I think that these really do represent, I trust the process and I appreciate looking a little deeper in it, but when I look at them, and it goes back to the resolution we passed last summer around systemic racism in our school systems, the decision-making structure alone. To unpack that piece it's big for people. That's how people can kind of get in and understand how a school district works, how you advocate, how you're involved and you have the best educational experience and really meet what we're trying to do, our mission of our district, and same with climate and continuous improvement. And I also just think that we've always had a lot of data, so I'm not so stuck on that this is data rich. I am a little, my caution comes from the root cause. If we can figure out the root cause, you're gonna be like a bajillionaire, right? I think that there is not one, there never will be one root cause, and because we're dealing with a district that's super diverse in every single way, and everybody comes with their own, story and experience, and whether it's positive or negative. And so I think that, how we look at that is really going to matter. So I just really appreciate it. I love the data triangulation. I think it's really unique that, how Lisa, you said it's not an audit in its typical sense, but we're working through the interpretation of all this data. And I'm really excited for the future of, I love how TeamWorks is woven in here, pre-pandemic and during pandemic and now post-pandemic, all of it coming together to really position our district to lead in our state and in the country. And I think we're well positioned to do that and to really address some generational barriers, and so in education. And so I thank you so much for all of this work, and I think you guys have an amazing team. I wish I could have been more part of it more, like even Heather, you said, I wasn't part of it. I just, saw and I definitely, get the survey, telling me to fill out the equimetric survey query. I get those, so I wanted to do that. So anyways, I thank you very much.
Can I ask another question?
Do I have an option? No, go ahead.
Do I have an option? May I ask another? No, I'm just curious, because I understand that all the domains are extremely important. Was part of the conversation on choosing climate because we know that kids are more engaged when they feel like they're safer and feel more, that the climate feels like a good climate, and so that in order to have the engagement, we have to have that, I'm just thinking of all the research that I've read on that and wondering if that was part of that conversation.
That was part of it as we just think about this notion of Maslow before you bloom, right?
Right.
The climate is all about this Maslow, and bloom is all about instruction. So if we take care of those basic human needs, we believe that instruction obviously is going to be elevated. In the same way, as we look at item domain G, which is family and community engagement, because Corey, the board, has supported our creation of our family and community engagement team. We believe that we have the infrastructure there to realize that outcome. So just by virtue of some of those other things around just inherently held beliefs around some of the educators and professionals that we had who are making meaning of this data, we believe we're able to condense this list a little bit rather than looking at 7. We're really looking at 5 to 6 in that regard, just as we think about this notion of if our climate is conducive to learning, our scholars are going to learn more.
I appreciate that, thanks.
Board Chair Dustin Walton, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I actually do have a question about the ordering of the priorities. They're listed 1, 2, 3. Is that in order of their significance?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think thank you very much, Lisa, Michael, thank you so much. More clearly is coming on this journey with this work, and it's another milestone in our effort so far, so we're really proud of that, and we'll continue to bring more to you. So we're going to move us on to our third and final agenda item tonight. Thank you, Sherry, for helping out up there. Board members, I remember talking about this in my interview. You come to the district, and we're finally getting to a point where we can realize this idea of bringing student representatives to the school board. With me tonight is Kelly Parpart, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Schools, and Amy Janisek, our district level principal, who's been with us all year, but you maybe haven't seen her because we've been in so much virtual spaces that you're a veteran already, Amy. So again, yeah, this topic has been one we've been interested in pursuing, but it was another one that we had to pause on a bit with so much of the impact of COVID. But this spring, we had the opportunity to do research and really look at the different models of other districts around the metro. Tonight, Amy will be providing you with an overview of the process we went through, options available to the board, and really this is for you to decide. Our job was to bring options forward for you to consider. And I'll wrap up the presentation with some additional program features and considerations, and then a recommendation before asking the board for some direction on where you'd like to go with next steps. So with that, I'll just wait for Amy to get to the right spot here. We were so close, Sherry. And if you're like me, you always type in the wrong,
Yeah, I always put my one initial in the wrong spot.
Amy, it's 279. Sorry. I do that all the time.
we're all going through the same steps in our head. You go. All right, we're ready.
We're ready. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre. Appreciate the introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here this evening. And so I am excited to share with you that our superintendent has tasked myself and Assistant Superintendent Kelly Parpar with creating a student school board rep program. And so he asked us to come together with a few different options to share with you. But this is truly your program that is meant to be meaningful for all of you as you engage in the board process. So as I move forward, we have created 3 different models for you to consider, but know this is a launching point, and so you may be drawn to one particular model that is the most interesting or maybe feels the most relevant, but know that if there's pieces from maybe one model that you would like to take from and kind of merge it into the final outcome for what this program will look like, you certainly can do this. So they are not their own individual model that have to stay intact in that way. So as we begin, I want to share a little bit of the background information on how we arrived at some of these different models. So I gathered information from 13 different districts just to look at what is currently in place across the state of Minnesota. The school board guidelines also from the Minnesota School Board Association were reviewed as well, as they have some information on what successful programs look like. We consulted with 2 board directors from other metro area school boards. We met with our own legal counsel. We held weekly meetings with myself and Kelly Parpart, and also consulted with the high school principals through the process. So there's really a kind of a deep dive looking at what really exists out there, what is working well with some districts, and what are things that we think would be beneficial for our own district. So as I said, we came up with 3 different options, and each option is going to have advantages as well as some challenges. And I also want you to keep in mind that through this model, or through these options, this is intended to include representatives from 5 of our sites. So our 3 traditional high schools, and then our 279 online, and our OALC. Okay? So the first option, a summary of what that would look like for the students, and there's a lot of acronyms in here. So we have the student school board rep. Now, they would attend the monthly meetings, but they would not attend work sessions. They would also attend the first part of each meeting, and then they would leave after their update. The students would attend the board meetings in the months of September through May, and in this particular model, the students are seniors and would serve a 1-year term. The way that we would recruit and identify students are that the principals would work with National Honor Society or the senior class cabinet to identify students. And we would hope to have that mirror our demographics and have a diverse group of students in our school board rep. And then by the end of their junior year, the student reps would be identified. How they would participate in a board meeting is at the very beginning, they would prepare a 3 to 5 minute summary of school updates, and they would work in participation with the school administration. And then after that 3 to 5 minute update, the students would then leave the board meeting. As I said, there are advantages and challenges to each one of these models. So for the first one, students would be engaged in civic engagement. They would have a 1-year commitment, so most likely less likely, or there would be more opportunity for the students, but also less likely for burnout. More students could be interested because it is a more limited time, and the student board reps would be more engaged in their school community as they would be regularly connecting with others on monthly board updates. Some of the challenges is NHS and senior class cabinet members already hold leadership positions. And so this would limit how we would get other students involved. This limited actual involvement with the board and the board meeting process. Students would not sit at the board dias because of the short amount of time they are present. And then this also limits student involvement to only seniors. Option 2. Option 2. This consists of the student board rep would also attend the monthly school board meetings, and they would not attend the board work sessions. The students would sit at the board dias with nameplates along with all of the board members. They would attend board meetings again September through May, and the students are seniors and would serve a 1-year term. However, this was one of our first rounds of thinking with this, and upon further review, really maybe makes sense to actually have it be juniors and or seniors. So with the recruiting and identification, again, in our initial thinking, we were targeting seniors, but this first bullet would really represent juniors and seniors. And this would be open to all, not just a particular student leadership group. The application the students would respond to would be a short Google form where they would have written responses. We want our students to have a focus on equity, and we would also try to understand their interest for participating in this board process. They would work with the senior high principals, myself as the district level principal, any interested board members, and other stakeholders that would want to interview the students. And then by the end of June, the students would be identified. So again, we want to make every effort to make sure we have a diverse group of students in these roles. How would these students participate in this second option? Students would prepare, again, a 3 to 5 minute summary at the beginning of the meeting. They would then also review the board packet in advance with the student rep mentor. Students would be prepared to answer questions from all of you as board members in which you are seeking input from students. The board would ask for student feedback on any agenda item at the very beginning of the meeting following those school reports. And then the students would be allowed to leave after their updates, and this allows them to still be involved if they have work responsibilities or are in activities or other outside of school responsibilities. So again, there's advantages and challenges to this model. The advantages are that it's expanded student engagement to juniors and seniors, again, beyond just NHS or senior class reps. The senior student reps would have an opportunity for civic engagement. Students would be assigned a board mentor, and they would help guide them through that process and help answer any questions. More student input and student voice on board issues, and they would have a more active role compared to option 1. Then the student school board reps would be more engaged in their school community as well. The challenges are limited space, more time-intensive process, and for some students that may deter them. It's a more rigorous application process, and this does limit, even though we talked about seniors, we can kind of just disregard this last bullet if we're opening it up to juniors and seniors. And finally, our third option. This one has the most, more intensive student involvement. So the student board rep would attend all school board meetings as well as the work sessions. The student board reps would sit at the dias with the nameplates along with all of you. The student board rep and board meetings and work sessions September through May. And the students are juniors with a 2-year term. But again, the grade level would really be up to you. That can be flexible in this particular model. We note that it would be juniors, but that's something for all of you to consider. Recruiting and identification. Again, information application offered to all students in 10th grade and 11th grade, so they would be ready in their junior and senior year. Similar application where they respond to a short Google form that would include written responses with an emphasis on equity to get at their interests, identifying a diverse group of students, and similar interview process with various stakeholders, and by the end of June, they'd be identified. The board participation looks a little different than in option 1 and 2. They would still do that same 3 to 5 minute presentation, so you're always going to be able to just hear what are the highlights or what's going on in their own individual school community. And they would also review the board packet. During the board meetings, the students would be prepared to answer questions coming from all of you. However, because they'd be staying for the entirety, they'd be more engaged throughout the board meeting. And in the work session, students would be prepared to answer questions from the board during the actual work session. So student reps would attend the board meeting and the work session unless it is a closed session. So some of the advantages and challenges are similar. This would be the most extensive involvement. Juniors or senior reps would have an opportunity for substantial engagement. Students would be assigned a board mentor. Again, more intensive student input and voice on board issues. Students would have a much more active role in this model versus in 1 or 2, and the student reps would be more engaged in their school community because of the more intensive involvement with the board. The challenges are that there is, again, limited space. It is a much more time-intensive process, and that really may well deter students from being involved because of other responsibilities, and we know our high school students their plates are very full. It's a more rigorous application process. It limits the student involvement to juniors or possibly juniors and seniors. Student burnout could be extensive, so a concern is that they start this process and maybe it becomes too time consuming, and then there could be potential for dropping out. And if we decide to select, a junior, there would be a 2-year time commitment, which that again could be it could be too much for some of our students. And finally, attending some of the work sessions may not be appropriate depending on the topic. So at this, I'm going to pass it on to Superintendent McIntyre.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So I'll cover some additional features and considerations for the board to take into account, and if Amy can click for me, thank you. So this program, as mentioned earlier, would establish Amy as our district level principal as the board mentor or the student mentor, doing the coordinating, support, preparation ahead of time, mentoring all the student reps as a collective group. And again, serving as the mentor, Amy would meet with all the students ahead of the meetings to do that coaching and feedback so that they're well prepared for each meeting. Included in the plan is also to have a backup plan for student reps in case they aren't able to attend. We can do that through some pre-recorded technology or other ways if we are able to have that advance notice. So there's some ways we could do that. And I do remember in a previous district where we had board reps, and that does happen. Activities happen, life happens, and when they're juggling a lot and learning how to time manage, there was times where they weren't able to always be present. On the next slide here, some onboarding pieces. So Amy as mentor would create an onboarding process in collaboration with Tim if we need his assistance that we could get done over the summer. And then myself as superintendent, Amy, would be able to meet with each student rep at their high school in September to welcome them and help answer any questions they have. And then at the end of the term, we also would look at a way for the board to share your appreciation for their serving on the board as student reps. And we're looking at a few different ways to do that, not only with maybe some kind of recognition with a plaque or something, but we're also looking at maybe some other options, whether it's in regards to stipends or scholarships or other options that we still need a little more time to flush out. But those would be in place by the time we launch the program. On the next slide here, as far as student voice, at my listening sessions this spring, I posed all 3 options to our students, and maybe minus one student who just chose to abstain, unanimous for option 2. There was literally no votes for any of option 1 or option 3. They really saw it as they wanted something that was manageable with their time. They felt option 3 was a bit of a big ask. And many of them said, they're juggling other commitments, jobs, athletics activities, family commitments, other things like that. And they liked the level of support and opportunity that option 2 had as far as the selection, when you think of selection process and the mentoring that can go on. So that was an interesting, Kelly was with me and we were surprised to see such a strong feeling from our students, and that's nearly 50 students that we polled in the high schools, and they were very tightly grouped with their feelings about it. On the next slide, here's some additional considerations. So the board may at some point want to think about, adding something to policy on this around having student reps on the board. My initial recommendation is pilot this for a year, see how this goes. You can always make those adjustments. It wouldn't have to be in policy. There's no requirement for it to be in policy. It could be a procedural kind of thing. But I think there's some learning that will happen as we go through the first year. And then if any adjustments are needed, then you would have to go back and change policy. You could update that if the board so chose. Due to the timing of the school year and our ability to get this proposal to you, we would begin the process of identifying and selecting students in September with the intention of students more than likely starting in the October board meeting to give us that first month of school to really get through a thoughtful and intentional process to identify who's representing their schools at all 5 of those representative positions. Also, just to point out, MSBA was clear to us as well that, as part of our search, they reminded us that because students are not elected officials like you all are, they would not be voting members of the board, and that we'd also be really thoughtful about providing any access to any real sensitive materials, information pertaining to personnel matters, legal action, negotiation strategies, land acquisitions, things like that, or any disciplinary things, any other confidential data that might be inappropriate for students to have knowledge of. As far as continuous improvement goes, the thinking here would be, at the end of each year, how do we know how we did, right? So let's evaluate the process. And we would ask students to kind of do that exit interview process that we would develop through either a survey and an interview that would really give us meaningful feedback about what was their experience like? What can we do better? What did they appreciate about it? How can we make that a better experience every year? We would ask board members to do the same. So how did it work for all of you? Is this meeting your needs? What adjustments would you like to see happen as we plan for the following year and make any adaptations necessary? Another piece that I would like to share is on the next slide here. Amy, if you can move on to, our timing's interesting on this. So the Brooklyn Bridge Alliance is moving into a Youth on Boards program that is starting in the fall. So we're a little bit out in front of it, and we're exploring participation in that program. I've had a few conversations already about it. I know Amy's reached out and talked to the 2 staff members that are designing it. So that program design's begun but not finished. They'll launch it in the fall. What we're hopeful for is, as potentially students and even Amy as the mentor would have the ability to be included in some training and support on how to be effective board members and how to support our students as student board reps. And really it's beyond school boards. This program's looking at other governance entities, so city government and others as well. So they call it tables because it's well beyond just school boards. So we're hopeful that that'll be a really nice fit for us. We'll have a little bit more information as we go further into the summer, into the fall as they launch that program. But I think it'd be a really good opportunity for us to participate with that program once we know a bit more about it. So when it comes to recommendations, our thinking, and this is for you to decide, but based on our research, the guidance we receive from other districts and how they've moved through learning how to do this well, MSBA, our high school principals, our student input, we think the best starting point is option number 2, and start with something that we can build success on, and then if the board feels like, hey, we want even more involvement, we've got a strong foundation that we could build on, and you could have some lived experience with it for a while before you make a larger commitment or a larger ask of our students from a participation standpoint. And at the end of that first year, the information that we gain through that evaluation process affords the board the opportunity to decide, to continue in the current model or make desired changes that you have based on the feedback you receive. So I think that's really, in essence, what we have for you tonight. And Amy, did a nice job identifying, I think with that option 2, opening it up for juniors and seniors. And it's a 1-year commitment that gives us, for those 5 positions, every year a new rotation of new students to come in, and it gives us what we need to make sure we do a good job preparing them and what to expect and how to work with you as the board. So I'm going to stop there and ask for any comments or any questions that you have that we can clarify, and really in the end looking for direction from the board and how you'd like to proceed.
All right, thank you. This is very, very exciting. I know. I'm going to start with Director Douglas. I know you've talked about this since you got on the board.
I am so excited. You have no idea. I've literally been talking about this since my very first MSBA meeting before I was even officially on the board. So, yeah, I'm really, really excited about this. I do like option 2. I do have a couple of questions. And this could just be like a grammatical or me misreading it. But on the slide that is for option 2, I think it's actually the first slide. It says, application, students would respond to a short Google form application that would include written responses with an emphasis on equity that would get at their interest. And I wasn't sure if that meant their responses should have an emphasis on equity or that the form has an emphasis on equity.
I think it would be both.
Okay.
We just want to make sure that whoever are individuals, they certainly come with their own identity, but we also live in a very diverse community, so we want to make sure that our students are grounded enough in their own understanding of equity that could be a lens in which they're looking at all of the questions that you may have for them.
Sure. Thank you for clarifying that. And I had another question pertaining to the opportunities for, where is it? Additional program features and considerations. As far as like their end of term, you know, you mentioned receiving a plaque. I'm wondering, is there an opportunity for like lettering points for like, you know, service in government or other things like that, that might be something that we could consider for those students that are participating in that? Because it is a really large time commitment. And I know that they receive opportunities to letter and other things that they volunteer, and also like a documentation of volunteer hours served so that they can use that for college applications.
Yep. Yeah, I think we certainly can explore that.
Okay.
Yeah, we even talked about, you know, the concept of a scholarship, and then we thought, well, maybe not everyone's going to go to college. Maybe they're going in a different career path. So I think we're starting to think in our minds of generating maybe some options.
Sure.
And I love the service and governance idea a lot, so we can dig into that a bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I had one more question, and now I think I forgot it. All right, you might have to come back to me because it's to my mind, sorry.
Okay. Director Simon.
Yeah, thanks. This is helpful, and it's good to have the input, Superintendent McIntyre, from the students. In discussing this with the students, was there support more from, yes, they'd be interested in serving in that capacity, or yes, they felt that their voice would be represented by selecting one student from each of the schools? Like, I'm just trying to understand the context of the question so I can interpret the response back.
We basically did what we did with you. We laid out the three options and asked them to choose which one they felt most suited them, right? And that was their response pattern, so.
So
I'm not
if
sure if I'm answering.
if they were to fill that position versus, yes, we'd like an option and this would be an option that would reflect our voice to the board. I'm trying to get at, the purpose of this is to ensure that we understand the student perspective in decisions and actions that impact them. And I'm just wanting to clarify if that's how they understood it and felt that in saying yes, number two, was it more like I would be willing to participate if it was number two, or number two would achieve that outcome?
They really looked, I mean, we were clear about what the purpose is. I think they really kind of looked at it from a, here's what time I have to commit, here's how much I'm willing to commit to, with the balancing of all the other, not their own studies, other things in their life. So they felt like that seemed to be the appropriate level of commitment.
Yep, they looked at it more from a global student perspective than their own. Like, this is what I would want. They looked at it as option two would be what would attract most students to apply and participate.
Okay, I got it. So, well, I think it's, you know, something that's intriguing and could be beneficial to students. We do get I'm just thinking of the practicality of it, and I do appreciate the other forums that we have for student voice, which includes more people and more students, and I like the listening sessions that you have. We do get our board packet on Friday, and to then have students, I mean, tonight's, it was a work session, was 300 pages. And then to have students be speaking for the entire student body between Friday and Tuesday on potential issues that they've not seen or studied in the past. I'm just, again, it sounds really great in concept. I'm just trying to think through the practicality of it and if it will achieve its intended purpose. I think certainly it could be a beneficial program for the students. I'm just, again, wondering if it's really going to serve the purpose that we've said we want with a program. So.
Can I just add, but Amy, with you being kind of the assigned, you know, their advisor, I don't know what it's called in here. I know you're
mentor.
Mentor, thank you. I'm assuming that you're gonna kind of guide them and really help coach through this, because this is, I mean, holy crap, like even being on the board for 2.5 years, I'm still, you know, there is a lot to learn still. It's very complex. And I know there's a board mentor as well, right?
That would be me.
That you will be the board mentor. Okay, I was like, so I mean, I think that is a huge, that's gonna be a huge piece to this.
Yes.
Just to, because I I hear what you're saying.
And we really expect next year, if the board decides to do this, will really be a year of learning for all of us, right? A year of what works and what do we maybe want to tweak going into the next year. But we felt like we really needed a jumping off point, a place to start, and we're sure we're gonna learn a lot next year.
And I think there are, you know, I appreciate the question, because there are some logistics pieces that, as we're thinking more globally about some of the programs, we didn't get quite into the weeds as, yet, but know that we will be as we move forward. So I think that is a really valuable question just for us to think about. I also think there's, you know, every topic that's discussed at the board may not be as relevant for student input. And I mean, that's not to diminish our student voice, but I think there's probably some places that are going to be more intentional connection points for hearing from our students. And so I think that's where the mentoring will come in, is you know, even hearing from some of you around what are the topics that you know are coming that you really want to hear from kids. And I anticipate, you know, I'll be having meetings with them on that Monday, you know, before the board meeting, so they're feeling prepared or knowing what topics or what ideas you'd want to be hearing more from our students. So we can kind of narrow them down to prepare them. But, you know, again, we're going to learn a lot the next year as how we navigate through this.
So to jump in on that,
Hold on, were you?
No, that's all my questions, thanks.
Sorry, Joe.
No, I just, at the same topic, I'm wondering that, because we have to kind of set the calendar, right, ahead of time as a board. If we, as a board, can identify, okay, we want more student input on, you know, X, Y, and Z of this month, but not A, B, and C, or whatever the issues are. Then if we know in advance, then is it possible that your role could be to talk to the student reps and say, okay, the board wants input on this, and how are you going to gather input from more students than just yourself in this process? Because I know when I watch Minneapolis school boards, their rep does a lot of surveying and things of other students, so that was one of my questions as well, as if we want feedback for a certain subject. It seems like if they just show up to the board meetings, they don't know anything that happened at the work sessions. Yeah, so.
Awesome.
I just wanted to go, oh.
It's your turn.
And now it's my turn. I like the idea of piloting. I'm wondering, I'm wondering if we want to talk about doing some one-year terms and some two-year terms to have some consistency rollover. I don't know. I know we didn't ask the students if they'd be willing to do that, but it's very clear if we want student voice that option 2 would be the option, because that's what they were clear about. So I'm all good with that. The other question I had is the application process being solely a written type of application, solely because I think some of the richness of the diversity in our district are based on oral traditions, and so I'm wondering if that's something we could maybe play around with and think about different ways. That's it.
Thank you. Director Thomas. Director Rowe.
Everybody else.
You can go either way on that one, okay?
I'm not the most, I like Thomas, but, you know. So, working with the Brooklyn Bridge Alliance this year, I am also really excited about this, and this has been on my mind since day one. So I'm curious, Superintendent McIntyre, when you had the listening sessions, how familiar were the students with board meetings? Like, do they regularly watch board meetings? Do they understand the difference between a work session and a business meeting? All of those things. Or was this selected because it was the easiest option, number 2?
Well, it wasn't the easiest. Number 1 would have been the easiest, but.
I'm sorry, because it was the, well, maybe not easiest is the right word.
Less
but
time.
Less time commitment, yeah, exactly.
You know, we didn't have the kind of time to go, ask those kind of questions to students, whether they know the difference of work sessions or meetings. My sense is they're not real clear on, they know that when we explain the board meets for this purpose once a month. They also have work sessions to do this purpose, the difference between a regular meeting and a work session. I didn't get a strong read that a lot of them watched a lot of our meetings. They're involved in their own lives, so that was just my sense. We didn't ask that, I guess. So I'm not sure I'm helping you much here, Director Brooks, but.
Well, I think you are. I mean, I had an answer to that question before I asked it. I mentioned this prior to the meeting that I didn't necessarily feel that any of the three options in this current state were the best options. I do understand wanting to launch this, get it going, find out, what those lessons learned are, and adjusting as we need to in the future. But I do think that we can use some practicality in this. And so much of the information that we receive, so much of the dialogue, the questions that we ask, the thorough presentations, a lot of that happens in the work sessions. And I think it's really important that if our students are to have a weighted voice in this, that they are participating and present at the work session. I do like the sort of expedited approach at the business meeting, providing some sort of, or giving some sort of student presentation or report on their perspective on the decisions that come before the board. I do really like that, and then maybe having an option to leave the meeting at that point, also after being able to hear public comment. Let me see, and then I also wanted to sort of lessen the burden a little bit and take away a year. So instead of the 2-year commitment, take it down to 1, maybe with an option to renew. I know that it does take a while to get through all the acronyms and learn the ropes and really feel like you're getting what's going on in the district. So, maybe we consider the option to renew in the future, but I do think for starting out that we should open this up to juniors and seniors, 1-year commitment, fully present at the work sessions, maybe just a student presentation at the business meeting, and then they can leave and go to other activities. I feel like I'm missing one thing. And then we may also want to consider some sort of curfew, or maybe not curfew is the right word, but I don't know that they need to be here till 10 p.m. if our meetings ever get back to that. So just being sort of mindful of that as well in advance.
We used to have agreements to be done at 9 o'clock on work session nights, but this past year kind of made it tough.
It was a hard year, let's just be honest.
Yeah, I hear you, yeah. So they can have some expectations.
But it doesn't mean that they couldn't attend work sessions, the student reps.
Well, if some did and some didn't, I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of turn.
It's a work session. It's a work session, we're good. All good.
I was just thinking if some did and some didn't, then we would have inequity in their knowledge.
That was my
I just think if we're going to do this, we should create the framework for it and be very clear what our expectation is as a board of them. I also wanted to comment because I kept hearing the board asking the students questions, and I was sort of picturing us bringing 5 students in and then kind of asking them a bunch of questions one by one. And I really want to make sure that we're all on the same page as well, that they should be, I want them to feel like they have weight in their voice, and that they are a board member, even if they don't have the ability to vote. And I don't want them to just be paraded in here and asked a bunch of questions by board members, instead of really being able to use their critical thinking skills, ask questions, hear the presentations, and provide a report for us to use at the business meeting, so, or, I'm sorry, whatever those second meetings are called, so, yeah, that's my last thought, so.
Right, Director
Thank you.
Grady.
I don't have any questions, but thank you so much for your presentation, and I really look forward to increasingly have more models of student involvement, and this is a really great place to start. Thank you for your work, both of you.
And I just would concur. I mean, I think most of us have wanted something that like this, a representative from a student, excuse me. And so I think that, I mean, I just love, I mean, it's so cliche it's becoming, but like in the midst of this year, like to even like move forward with something like this is huge. So I really appreciate this. And I know a lot of work, because every district, if they do have school board reps, they do they're very different, you know? And so I appreciate the thoughtfulness of ensuring that, you know, let's say option 2 is the preferred option, that there is representation from each of our schools, because I think that's really, really, really important. And I think it is going to be, I just think we need to kind of start kind of where we know we can have some success and then build on top of it. Like, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the work session, Director Brooks, for sure. I just, having a high school student, I don't know how they would fit that in. I mean, that's a lot of extra work on top of the weeks that she has, like so much, you know, classwork. I mean, that's just a lot. I mean, we can barely do it and we work a full-time job. So I don't know. I mean, I would be more inclined to do option 2 right now, knowing that we could always, and we want to hear feedback from them. Like maybe, you know, midpoint into it or something, they say like we're not getting, you know, we're not getting enough context. We want to be at a work session, and maybe we work with Amy and evaluate it. So my preference would be option 2. I don't know if everybody said their preference, or if they even have one. Do we want to go back around real quick?
I actually have just a couple of
go ahead.
technical questions.
Sure.
One of the questions that I have is around criteria for student involvement. Like, what type of criteria does the student have to meet in order to be able to participate? Like, for example, you know, I know that in certain sports or activities, if you drop below a C grade point average, you're no longer allowed to participate. Because this is so time consuming, I wouldn't want to hinder their other more important studies by putting too much pressure and work on them, and other things like, you know, completion of credits towards graduation, things like that. I'm just wondering what type of criteria you've considered.
We have not considered any yet, but I think that's a good question for us to think about. And it's a balance, as you ask the question, it's a balance between creating opportunities for all of our students. And this could be the thing for a student that gets them energized to then go back and be more focused on school. So certainly we want to take into consideration what could be some criteria and do that without creating barriers.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could do something more like, not a significant drop in their attendance. You know, instead of saying you have to have a GPA of whatever or whatever, just wherever you're at when you start, let's not see significant drops.
Yep.
And at that point, we have to, you know, like talk about, is this the right fit for you, kind of a thing, rather than, because I think there are a lot of incredibly intelligent students that isn't always reflected in their grades and all that jazz. The other thing I'm wondering is, with work sessions, is there a way to get kind of a notes or summary or something to our student reps so that they can do a little, instead of having to be here for the whole, because when I first saw this, I was with Thomas, they should be here for the whole entire thing, but then you know, obviously the students don't think that, because their lives are crazy. And so then when I went back and remembered what teenagers were like, because I don't have to anymore, just kidding. Then that totally makes sense. So how can we help them be as successful as possible and help us get the information and the dialogue that we, you know, really need? Because I do think we need to be partners with them and have them have that weight of that voice. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate all the work you put into this.
I think we could find a way to, in the mentoring preparation meetings, make sure we bring in any topics that were at our work session. Sometimes they're not always, some are just regular board meetings and not work sessions. So I think, I like what you're thinking about incorporating a summary or some kind of information from work sessions that were on topics that now come to a regular meeting. So I got to think more about your criteria question. I think there's some things we can do around attendance, not only at school, but attendance at the meetings.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors in regards to
Yeah.
criteria and participation and things like that that we need to consider.
So I do worry about the time commitment. In the same way that I know this is a huge time commitment for even elected board members. It's difficult for every parent, family, or community member to be able to take this on. So I think one of the things that I do worry about is by not attending the work session and then showing up to give a 3 to 5 minute summary of their perspective on the issues, that they're missing out on so much key information. And while they're getting highlights, updates, or some sort of presentation from staff, I do know that staff doesn't, I've seen staff leave out other perspectives in the past. And so they may just get a presentation with a recommendation from staff on how we should go, but they're missing the questions and the diverse perspectives that come from the board or that are generated through discussion with others. So I think I'm just starting to feel like some sort of advisory, like another advisory committee, and less of like a student school board rep in my mind. It's just not holding the same weight in this existing model. I love that the board is wanting to be inclusive. That's certainly important, and we want any of our students that want this type of opportunity to have access to it. But I also want to be realistic that we are making some big decisions and taking on some big things, and this may not be for every single student. Maybe we can find other ways to engage them and get them into committee work, or maybe there is some sort of standard student advisory body outside of the student reps. But
we are building a superintendent student advisory leadership team next year. It doesn't mean that those reps would be your board reps, though. It might be a different group of students that would be serving on a superintendent's advisory committee.
Well, I'm kind of with Thomas. I'm kind of with Director Brooks as we've had this discussion, that I'm not quite convinced that this is the right mechanism, that it might be a different mechanism.
I think that having student board reps is a really good idea, but the purpose of the board reps does not necessarily fit with what option 2 is. Does that make sense? Like, maybe we have an advisory committee or something. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but I agree that the purpose doesn't quite encompass the student level of interest and participation. And we may need to reevaluate what the purpose is of having a student body board representation.
One of the districts that I spoke with began, in a very basic place, closer to option 1 and 2. But they now have a very robust program where they do have other committees with more students involved, and the students are also a part of committee work. But that's after, I'd say 6, 7, 8 years. Like, every year it's evolved and grown. And so that was probably one of the most robust programs that I saw, that involved many students, that felt like really authentic participation, getting at some of the things I'm hearing. And we also wanted to put forward, where is a place that we can start, knowing that every year as we move through this, we're going to learn what worked or what we need to change, and it's going to evolve into we don't know where, but there's a lot of possibility for what you're bringing up. But what is reasonable for where we can start to engage in this process? And being really clear on what makes the most sense and purpose.
I mean, I think we could critique this to death. We got to start somewhere, and I think that, like, whether it's an advisory committee, which is a whole heck of a lot of work too, and I feel like, we've already kind of set the direction. We want student voice. We're getting it from many different areas. I don't see the reason why we wouldn't move forward with something. It's a kind of a fresh year. It's an opportunity to bring voices in we have not heard. We're not going to let people just we're not going to extract. We're going to engage. I mean, this is literally what we've been talking about since I think many of us have been on the board. So, I mean, my preference would be option 2. Let's just get started. Let's see what students, I mean, we don't want to sell our students short either. I mean, they're brilliant, and we don't know what's going to come of it. So I think this is really, and other districts do it, and they do it successfully. And some that haven't, we've heard from them too. So I think this is really great.
And we can always tweak it. We can always start thinking about creative things, like if we do the student engaged topics for a work session first, so students can get to their activities right away, or, I think we can be creative about going option 2, and I also think we need to look at what our purposes are, because I've seen student reps just be liaisons between the board and students. I've seen students rep have authentic voice on. I mean, there's so many different benefits to having students on the board that I don't want us to get stuck on, we want this exact purpose at this moment, that we don't see a bigger picture is kind of where I'm standing.
So I just want to be clear that I wasn't saying that we should not move forward with a student rep. I was just saying that the option that is presented in front of me right now isn't matching with what I was expecting from the student reps. So I get this eagerness to push this forward and get it going, but I mean, I think we can also take a second and actually get it right to begin with. You said there are a number of districts that have student reps right now, and that maybe started at one place and have now evolved into a different place. I think we can learn some lessons from their evolution. And if this isn't fitting our existing purpose, then why would we push it forward to then expect a slow-moving ship to evolve and make those changes over time, when we can just get it somewhat right in the first place and then make those smaller tweaks as we need to?
I don't think it's wrong. So go ahead, were you going to say something?
That was one of the things we did learn from them. They said, we've learned a lot over time, but start with something that is manageable and reasonable that you can have some success with before, you kind of put something out there that might be really, really difficult just to coordinate and organize all in the first year. So the models that we came forward with kind of came with some of the learnings that we asked from those other districts that we talked to.
And I think I'm just missing what the unreasonable expectation is from the discussion today. I mean, if we're saying that we really want to put our focus into getting them to prepare a 3 to 5 minute summary of their takeaway from their presentation with you and Superintendent McIntyre, I mean, I think that's different than having student voice integrated and on the school board, and really having an impact on the discussion and the decision that comes out of this board. Those are 2 different things. To me, this is almost like an essay assignment that we could give to our student council or to an advisory class. I mean, this is just different than what I had in mind. So yeah,
So I want to clarify.
What if they came to the work sessions and had a video presentation for the regular meeting?
I would be fine with that.
Can we clarify about the 3 to 5 minutes? The 3 to 5 minutes is an update on their school.
Yeah.
Not on the work sessions.
Or not on any topics.
Not on any
necessarily.
topic, it's about what's going on in their school.
That's the liaison part that I was talking about.
So we wouldn't ask them to prepare any kind of comments or reactions or questions about any of the topics. That would come more through the, we have a big topic that we want to talk about as board members. This is the one we really want to focus on, getting some student engagement. After the students would present that information about each of the schools, or each of their school communities, then we would shift to what is the conversation or dialogue around different board topics. Now, again, this is meant to be meaningful for you so we can adjust this, but the thinking was, as we shift, then instead of having students stay for the whole time, some of these authentic conversations would happen, following those presentations, and then maybe that lasts 30 minutes because you've gathered information and they've asked questions, and then at that point, they would then leave, and then the rest of the meeting would carry on.
I think of like when we were around technology and Anthony was presenting and all the different options, and the one thing I didn't think, we had a couple students come during one of the meetings, but I mean, I was like, that would be a time for me, or you'd want to say like, what are what's working, what's not working? I remember I listened to Minneapolis School Board, their student rep, when they were discussing SROs, student resource officers. It was really fascinating because their student reps they kind of did their due diligence, and they brought back like from many perspectives, like what their SROs meant to them, what they'd like to change, and it was a really thorough. But it was they took a topic that was of interest to them as well, and that the board wanted information, and it was really meaningful. And that's the thing, I think that comes out of this, and I think we just gotta give it a chance because.
I think it doesn't feel efficient for us to have a thorough discussion in a work session. And thank you for the clarification on the 3 to 5 minute summary, because that wasn't clear here. But it doesn't feel efficient for us to have a thorough discussion in the work session, to also ask a bunch of questions behind the scenes to admin like we usually do. I've noticed a pattern on this board that when we get to that second meeting, we tend not to have as many questions because we've asked so many questions prior to that. So now we're having to restart that discussion to bring in the board reps or the student reps that weren't at the work session, that didn't hear that discussion. So in my mind, one of two things is gonna happen. We still won't have a ton of questions, but we'll ask them for their perspective and ask them a ton of questions, which brings me back to my previous concern of having them sitting in front of us and being paraded with a bunch of questions from us. Or we have to restart that entire discussion because then we have additional questions or additional comments.
Or that topic is at the regular meeting.
And not able to process.
We have a work session.
I'm sorry, and then not able to process the feedback that we got from the students before we make that decision.
I don't know, there's a lot of
It just
shoulda,
doesn't
woulda,
seem
couldas.
efficient.
What I think should happen is, it's already 9/11, and I feel like we're continuing to rehash. So I think that, Superintendent McIntyre, I look to you I don't know if you follow up with some of the board members that have.
I can.
I guess.
Ultimately need direction from you.
Yeah.
This is your project, right? So we can keep coming back with ideas. I think even I really think it's valuable for you to hear from students what's going on in their schools.
Yep.
And those 5-minute updates, even though it's about a half an hour of time, that's their chance to tell you about all the things that are happening.
Yep.
Usually they're positive things, right? So that's valuable. In my North St. Paul Maplewood Oakdale district, Tartan and North kids came and they shared the board, here's what's happening in our building. And it was the board really loved it, right? They loved hearing about all the different things happening with the students. My opinion is start where you start. You gotta start somewhere with an entry point and we can develop it and build it. That's my recommendation.
So should we just take a second to go around and state our preference and direction?
Yes, Director Douglas.
I will start. I believe that we should begin with option 2, but I would like some more clarification around some of the other questions that I asked around like criteria and like things like that. But that's my general direction is option 2.
Director Simon?
I'm not ready to support an option tonight, but I do agree that, what Corey mentioned about presenting. I think something, I'd like to see something, but I'm not ready to support any of the ones tonight yet.
Dr. Mosqueda Jones.
I'm good with going with option 2 and understanding that we would probably tweak it.
Director Brooks.
I'm not ready to support any of these options at the moment.
Director Grady.
Option 2.
And my preference is option 2, so I think we can move forward with option 2. All right, we are going to adjourn this work session at 9:13 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.